Hello everyone. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're listening from, and what time is it for you. Now, let me tell you a story. My name is Carter Langston. I've been with the National Park Service for nearly 15 years, and for most of that time, I worked in a quiet, lesser-known preserve tucked away in the far northwest. The kind of place where moss hangs thick from the trees and the fog never fully lifts. Beautiful, yes, but ancient. The forest out there feels older than time, and sometimes it feels like it remembers things you'd rather it forget. He had a voice like gravel and a habit of going quiet whenever something didn't sit right with him. The kind of man who never spooked easily. Until he did. It began with a missing hiker named Nolan Harper. He was experienced, solo, and had told the ranger station he'd be camping along the Green Ridge Trail, a path rarely traveled even in the peak season. 3 days later, his girlfriend came in, panicked. He hadn't returned, so I was dispatched. The Green Ridge Trail is steep, isolated, and swallowed by towering firs that blot out the sky. I'd hiked it dozens of times, but that day felt wrong. I can't explain it. The trees seemed closer. The wind didn't move. Even the usual background chorus of birds and insects was gone. An hour in, I found a red jacket hanging from a branch. Brand new, still clean, but soaked in dew like it had been out all night. No footprints, no drag marks, no blood. Just there. I radioed it in. Miles sounded concerned. Told me to keep going, but stay sharp. Half an hour later, I found the backpack half-zipped and dumped like it was tossed in a hurry. Inside was Nolan's ID, a few granola bars, and a water bottle that hadn't even been opened. That's when I noticed the silence had deepened. I couldn't even hear my own footsteps over the hush of the woods. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I saw her. A woman, collapsed on the ground, maybe 50 yards off trail. Torn up clothes, blood on her leg, barely breathing. She wasn't supposed to be there. I called Miles. He told me to stay put and wait for medics. But while I waited, she came to for just a few seconds. Her lips trembled. "Don't let it get me," she whispered. Then she passed out again. That single sentence changed everything. Medics came, airlifted her out. I should have left then. But I couldn't not with Nolan still out there. So I pressed on alone. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched long between the trees. And then I saw it, not Nolan, not a bear. A figure tall, almost grotesquely tall, and thin in the way that bones look under too tight skin. It was standing in the trees, unmoving, pale like ash under moonlight. Its eyes, God, those eyes were pits. No light. No reflection, just void. I raised my flashlight. The thing hissed an unearthly rasp and slid back into the forest like a snake. I ran back to the station, breath burning in my lungs. Miles was waiting for me. Took one look at me and knew I'd seen something. I told him everything. He didn't call me crazy. He just grabbed his rifle and said, "We go back first, Light." We did. Together, what we found weren't bare tracks. They were something else, human-shaped, but long, wrong, as if the bones inside didn't know where to sit. They led us to a cave, moss-covered, almost hidden. The tracks vanished into it. We followed. The air inside was wet and metallic. We moved slow, careful. Then we heard it shuffling, breathing. We turned the corner and saw it. The pale thing crouched over someone. Nolan. He was still alive, just barely sprawled beneath that thing. It looked up, eyes like pits, and in that moment I felt it in my bones. This wasn't just some creature. It was ancient, and it hated us. Miles fired. The shot echoed like thunder. The creature shrieked and backed into the dark. We grabbed Nolan and ran, but it followed. Always just behind. We could hear it, breathing, dragging its limbs over the stone. At the mouth of the cave, it lunged one last time. Miles shot it again, point blank. The thing screeched and collapsed into the dirt. We didn't wait to see if it stayed down. We made it back to the station, barely. Nolan was airlifted to the hospital. He survived, but he doesn't speak. Not anymore. The cave? Emptied when authorities came. Not a sign of the thing. Not even blood. We call it the Pale Watcher now. A name spoken in hushed tones when the fog rolls in too heavy or the trees go too quiet. They closed the Green Ridge Trail, quietly. No official announcement. My name is Clay Reeves. In the summer of 2019, I took a seasonal gig as a fire lookout in a remote section of the Bitterroot Range in western Montana. I'd worked a few lookout towers before loved the solitude. The views, the way the rest of the world seemed to melt away once you were high above it all. But that season was different. That summer still keeps me up at night. The tower was called Elk Watch, a creaky, weathered box perched on stilts about 30 feet above a granite ridge. There was no road access. Supplies were dropped in by helicopter once every 2 weeks. My job was simple. Scan for smoke, report weather, stay sharp. I had a shortwave radio, a solar battery, and a logbook. That was it. No cell service, no internet. Just me, the trees, and the silence. At first, it was everything I'd hoped for. The days were long and golden. Nights were quiet, filled with the sound of wind through the pines and the occasional distant cry of a mountain lion. The isolation didn't bother me. If anything, it felt like freedom. That changed around the 3rd week. Then came the voices. Faint at first, like a conversation carried on the breeze. I'd step out onto the catwalk and scan the forest below, heart pounding. Nothing, just shadows. Just the endless sea of trees swaying under the stars. One night I heard someone call my name, not a yell, a whisper, as if they were standing just beneath the tower. I flicked on the floodlight and swept the base. Nothing but gravel and brush. I started locking the hatch at night. On the 23rd day, I found something. A pile of small bones arranged in a circle on the steps leading up to the tower. Clean, picked dry. I nearly slipped when I saw them. They hadn't been there the day before. I radioed in, told dispatch what I'd found. They logged it. Said that they'd mention it to wildlife control. Probably a fox or coyote, they said. Maybe even an eagle. but I could hear the unease in the operator's voice. The final night it came to a head. I was journaling when the radio crackled. "Clay, you there?" It wasn't dispatch. The voice was wrong, off, like it was mimicking human speech, but didn't fully understand how mouths worked. "Clay, come down." I froze. The voice came again. "We see you." Then silence. I killed the radio and grabbed the flare gun. An hour passed. Then came the tapping, but now it was all around the tower, on the walls, on the hatch. Something was climbing up. I lit a flare and shoved it out through the hatch. It ignited with a hiss, bathing the ridge in red light. That was when I saw them. Figures, 4 or 5 of them, tall and skeletal, just beyond the tree line, skin like wax, eyes like voids, watching, not moving. When the flare went out, so did the tapping. At dawn, a chopper arrived to deliver supplies. I was already packed. Told them I was done. No explanations. They tried to assign me another post at Fall. I declined. Now I live in a small town, far from the woods, but sometimes late at night I still hear tapping on the windows, and when I dream I see them standing at the edge of the trees, waiting. My name is Wyatt Colton. Back in 2015, I took a seasonal ranger position in the Cascade Mountains of Washington. It was a temporary job meant to buy me some time after a rough patch in my life, divorce, debt, the usual unraveling. I thought a few months alone in a fire lookout tower surrounded by mountains and trees would help me find peace. I didn't find peace. I found something else. Something that still follows me in dreams. The fire tower was called Mason Ridge. Old structure, wood and steel bolted together in the 1960s, perched above a stretch of dense pine forest so remote, hikers needed permits just to get near it. No road access, just a 6-mile trail, winding and steep. Supply drops came weekly by a TV or pack mule. I had a radio, a weather gauge, a field journal, and a pair of binoculars. That was about it. And I loved it. At first, there was something spiritual about being alone up there, 80 feet in the air, surrounded by nothing but fog and the soft hush of wind moving through the trees. Mornings were golden. Nights were freezing. But it was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones. The first time I noticed something was off, it was subtle. I logged it in the journal, even. October 7th, fog rolled in thick. Heard a voice. Thought it was the wind. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about the fog felt wrong, too still, too heavy. I stood at the window for hours, watching the dark treetops vanish into the gray. Just before dawn, I saw movement far below, where the trail ends near a broken wooden bridge. Someone standing, not walking, just standing there. I grabbed the binoculars, but the fog swallowed them before I could focus. By morning, there were no footprints, no signs of anyone. I radioed it in. Dispatch told me I was probably seeing remnants of an old trail marker. Told me not to worry, so I didn't. Not until 3 nights later. It was just after 2 a.m. wind had died. crickets had gone silent. I was half asleep when I heard a single knock at the base of the tower. Knock, pause, knock. Like someone tapping on the metal support beams. I thought it might be a bear, maybe an animal nosing around the food locker. I grabbed my flashlight, climbed halfway down the ladder, and shined it into the forest. Nothing, not a damn thing, until I looked down. There, at the very bottom of the ladder, was a hand. Just a hand long, pale fingers wrapped around the lowest rung. No face, no body, just fingers curling where they shouldn't be. I scrambled back up the tower so fast I almost fell, slammed the hatch shut and locked it. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't radio it in either. How the hell do you explain that? The next day I did a full sweep of the area. No tracks, no claw marks, nothing disturbed. It was as if whatever had touched the ladder hadn't actually existed. I told myself it was stress, isolation, the mind playing tricks. That worked until the knocking came back. It happened every night for a week, always around 2 a.m., always the same rhythm. Knock, pause, ... knock. I tried yelling, tried shining spotlights, tried ignoring it. Nothing changed. And then, one night, it climbed. I just settled into my cot, trying to drown the knocking out with my headphones, when I heard something scrape against the metal rungs of the ladder. It wasn't climbing fast. It was slow, deliberate, like it wanted me to hear. I stood there frozen, my flashlight in hand, heart racing as I stared at the hatch. And then, I kid you not, it tapped, from underneath the trapdoor. Not knocked, tapped, a rhythm, like fingers drumming gently on the wood. I backed away, pointing my flashlight at the door, knowing it wouldn't do a damn thing if that hatch started to open. But it didn't. Instead, I heard it whisper, "My name, my name." I don't remember falling asleep. I think I passed out. When I woke up, the sun was shining, and the forest looked like paradise again. I knew I had to leave. I packed that day, radioed dispatch, told them I was sick, something with my stomach. They said they'd send a replacement ranger up in 2 days. I said I'd wait, but I didn't. That night I barricaded the hatch with everything I had: chair, gear chest, even my cot. I sat with my back against the wall, rifle in hand, flashlight in the other, and waited. At 2:13 a.m., the knocking started. But this time it wasn't just the hatch. It was the walls, the windows, the beams. The whole tower started shaking, gently, like something huge was outside, pressing against it from all sides. Then I heard breathing right next to me, like someone was in the tower, inches from my face, breathing, but there was no one. When dawn broke, I didn't wait. I ran 6 miles down the mountain. Didn't stop once. I never went back. The replacement ranger never filed his logs, quit within 2 weeks. They shut the tower down a month later, claimed it was unstable, weather damage. But I know the truth, and I'm telling you this because someone needs to know there's something up there in the Cascades, something old, something hungry, and it knows your name. If you ever find yourself alone in a fire tower and you hear knocking at 2 a.m., don't answer it. Don't go down. And for the love of God, open the hatch. My name is Cole Barrett. I've been a park ranger in Glacier National Park for a little over 11 years. I've seen all manner of strange things out here, wildlife doing things it shouldn't, hikers acting out, even the occasional hoax from college kids with too much time and weed. But nothing I've witnessed, not in a decade of work, not during my 4 years in the military before that, has ever come close to what I encountered last October up on Summit Ridge. This story isn't official. You won't find it in my reports. You won't see it logged in any database. The Park Service doesn't want stories like this getting out. But I think people should know, because the wilderness isn't empty, not really. There are things out there, and some of them are still watching. Summit Ridge is one of those areas tucked deep into the northeastern section of the park, technically open to the public, but so remote most tourists never make it past the first trailhead. It's dense forest up there, thick with cedar and spruce, steep switchbacks, and silence so absolute it presses against your eardrums. We only check that area a few times a year, usually when winter's creeping in, and we need to confirm all the old fire towers and cabins are locked up and safe from snow collapse. This time I was assigned to do it solo. It was October 19th. The sky was overcast, the wind sharp with the bite of early snow. I started at trail marker 48 and began the long hike toward the old Summit Ridge Fire Tower, an hour and a half uphill through dense terrain. I had my radio, my GPS, a .357 sidearm, and a bear spray canister strapped to my chest, the usual kit. Nothing too dramatic. The first half of the hike was uneventful. There was some recent bear scat on the trail, but it was old days at least. I kept moving. Around 2 p.m. I reached the fire tower, still standing, surprisingly. No graffiti, no busted locks. I checked the interior and swept the surrounding area for signs of campers. Nothing, not even footprints. Then I heard it, a low, throaty moan, like someone calling out but with no words behind it. It echoed faintly from the tree line to the west. My first instinct was to call it in, but my radio buzzed with static. No response. I checked my GPS, still functioning, still in the zone. I figured maybe I'd picked up a distress call from a lost hiker. Happens more than you'd think. I followed the sound. It led me deeper off-trail, down into a narrow ravine, where the trees grew so close together you had to angle your shoulders to pass through. It was darker down there, colder too, and that moaning sound, it kept repeating like it was looping. Same tone, same length, same breath pattern. That's when the unease started to build. I stopped and listened. I didn't hear birds anymore. No squirrels, no rustling in the brush. Just the sound. I drew my sidearm, called out, "Hello, Ranger Barrett. If you're injured, call back." No reply, just another long, trembling moan. I pressed forward another 200 feet, and that's when I found the campsite. It was makeshift, clearly built in a hurry. A small fire pit still smoldering. 2 backpacks. 1 tent collapsed. Blood smeared across the nylon flap. I circled the site carefully. The ground was torn up in strange, uneven patterns, deep gouges in the earth that didn't match any animal I knew. Claw marks, but not like a bear. Too narrow. Too long. Then I saw the phone. It was half buried beneath some pine needles, screen cracked, but still glowing. When I picked it up, it immediately launched a video from the camera roll. Shaky footage late at night. A man's voice whispering, "It's out there? I swear to God it's out there." Followed by rapid breathing, and then a flash of something behind a tree, pale, tall, gone before the camera could focus. Then a scream, and static. I dropped the phone. That was when the moan came again, this time only 50 feet away, closer, louder, but now I could hear something behind it. Wet breathing and footsteps, but not in sync. They landed too softly, too slowly, like something crawling upright. I backed up, gun raised. The trees ahead shifted slightly, not from wind, from movement. I aimed. "This is your last warning." Then I saw it. It stepped into the clearing with a sort of jerky grace, like a marionette trying to walk like a man. It was tall, easily 7.5 feet, emaciated, its limbs too long, its joints bent slightly the wrong way. Skin pale and grayish, stretched thin like plastic wrap over bone, and the face, if you could call it that. It had eyes, black and wide, set too far apart. No nose, and a mouth that stretched almost ear to ear, full of thin, needle-like teeth. It opened that mouth, and it screamed, the same exact sound I'd been hearing for an hour. It wasn't a person calling for help. It was this thing mimicking human pain, like bait on a hook. I fired twice. The shots echoed. The creature recoiled, but didn't fall. It shrieked again and vanished into the trees, impossibly fast. I ran. I don't even remember most of it. I sprinted back toward the fire tower, nearly breaking my ankle on a root. I didn't stop, not until I saw the tower looming through the fog. I barricaded myself inside, sat in the corner, gun trained on the door, radio hissing static. Night fell, and then it came back. It didn't try to get in, it just circled the tower for hours, occasionally letting out that same scream. Sometimes it would tap on the walls, lightly, like it was knocking. And once it whispered my name. I don't know how it knew it, but it did. They found me the next morning, still in the tower, dehydrated and shaking. My radio had finally kicked back in around 3 o'clock a.m., and I managed to send a single message: send backup. Something's out here. They combed the ridge, found the abandoned camp. No bodies, just blood and claw marks. The phone was gone. I was ordered not to speak about it. Told the campers must have been attacked by a bear and that I'd suffered a stress-induced hallucination. They transferred me to another section of the park. Lower elevations, safer trails. But I still dream about it. Still hear that sound sometimes, when I'm alone, or when the wind shifts just right. And sometimes, God help me, I still feel like it's watching, waiting for someone else to follow the sound. My name is Cole Harper. I've worn the Ranger uniform for almost 20 years, first in Shenandoah, then Olympic, and finally here in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. This place isn't as famous as the others, and that's what drew me to it. Fewer tourists, fewer distractions, and a deeper quiet that settles in your bones if you let it. I transferred here in 2017 after my divorce. I needed space, peace, some kind of restart. The forest has always been where I go to find silence that doesn't ask questions. But some silences are warnings, not comforts. The trail I was assigned to monitor last fall hadn't been maintained in years. Locals call it Deep Line Pass, though you won't find it on any official map. It runs about 7 miles along a narrow ridge and then drops into a deep basin surrounded by cliffs and thick old growth. The terrain is rough, overgrown, and about as far from civilization as you can get without crossing the border into Idaho. The only reason we even started clearing the trail again was because a couple of backpackers went missing in the area the previous spring, vanished, gear and all. Their last known GPS ping had come from the pass. I was tasked with hiking out there alone, checking for signs of campers, and marking hazard points for future crews. I left just after sunrise on October 4th, 2023. Weather was clear. I logged everything by the book. It took me about 6 hours to reach the ridge. I kept notes, snapped photos of washed-out switchbacks, and flagged a few trees with blaze orange tape. By late afternoon, I was dropping into the basin. That's when I first noticed the carvings. Symbols, mostly, cut into the bark of ancient pines, some of them high up, far too high for a person without a ladder or climbing gear. Spirals, interlocked circles, a few that looked almost like eyes or jaws. At first I figured it was the work of old wilderness cult types or some survivalist group. Harmless, if a little creepy, I made camp near a glacial pond nestled against the cliff wall. Water was clean. No signs of animal prints. Just a faint smell of moss and pine and something else I couldn't quite place, something metallic and stale, like blood in a rusted pipe. I lit a fire, ate, logged my notes. And then, just after sunset, the forest went still. You have to understand, these woods are never silent. Not completely. Even on windless nights, there's always the trickle of water, the distant calls of owls, the rustle of small animals. But that night, nothing. Not even the sound of my own breath felt real. Like I'd stepped into a photograph of the world instead of the world itself. Then I saw the first figure. Across the pond, near the edge of the tree line, something was standing between 2 narrow birch trunks. It was tall, gaunt, too long in the limbs. It didn't move, didn't sway, just watched. I couldn't make out a face, just a pale, narrow shape, still as death. I reached for my flashlight, and as soon as I clicked it on, it was gone. No sound, no motion, just gone. I told myself I imagined it. I'd been alone too long. Stress, fatigue, but I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m., I heard movement behind the tent. Soft footfalls, careful, deliberate. I waited, holding my breath, hand on my sidearm. Then something whispered, right beside the tent wall. A voice, but not in any language I recognized. Low and guttural, like wet gravel being ground between teeth. I flung the tent open, flashlight in hand. Nothing, but the trees around the pond had changed. There were more of them, closer. Bent in ways I know they hadn't been hours earlier. I didn't sleep, just sat with my back against the tree, pistol in my lap, until the first gray light of morning crept through the canopy. At sunrise, I started hiking back. Fast, I skipped rest stops. Didn't check my trail markers. I just wanted out of that basin. About halfway up the ridge, I came across something I hadn't seen on the way down. A cairn. Stones stacked nearly to my chest, perfectly balanced in the middle of the trail. It hadn't been there before. Resting on the top stone was a single boot, a ranger boot. I picked it up. Inside was a toe, human, fresh. I didn't call it in. I should have. But some instinct screamed, don't speak its name. Don't draw attention. Just get out. By dusk, I was almost back to the trailhead when I saw movement up ahead. A man or something shaped like a man standing in the middle of the trail. But the way it stood, shoulders bent backward, arms too long, spine too high, the head tilted at an impossible angle, like it was listening to something behind it. And it had my face. I swear to God, it had my face. Mouth slightly open, eyes cloudy and distant, lips moving in a silent mockery of breath. I froze, couldn't lift my arm, couldn't scream. Then it took a step forward, and I ran. I don't remember the rest of the descent. I just remember the blood pounding in my ears and the sting of branches clawing at my face and arms. When I reached the ranger station, Earl was already there. He saw the state I was in, cut up, shaking, barely able to speak. He didn't ask questions, just put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You went past the line, didn't you?" I nodded. He just sighed. Forrest doesn't forget, Harper, and it doesn't let go easy. We found the incident as a false report, wildlife misidentification, but we quietly pulled all plans to reopen Deep Line Pass. The trail's been struck from the maps. We posted landslide warnings, barriers, anything to keep people out. But I know it's not enough. Last week, a new ranger kid named Mike asked about the trail. Said his GPS picked up something odd near the pond. I told him to stay away, that the land there doesn't want us anymore. He didn't listen. He's been missing for 2 days. I'm writing this now because I think it's my turn to go back, to see if there's still a chance to bring him home. I've packed light, flashlight, journal, sidearm, and a compass I don't expect to work once I reach the basin. If I don't return, please burn this log. Don't publish it. Don't investigate. Just let it end, because whatever is out there, it remembers, and it's hungry. Title: The Pale Stalker. My name is Braden Keller. I've been a ranger for 15 years in a national park few have heard of, a rugged, forested expanse in the Pacific Northwest, where silence stretches for miles and the trees seem older than time. This place is my home, my sanctuary, or at least it used to be. It started last fall, late October, when the air turned crisp and the visitors thinned out. My partner, Earl, and I were preparing the Green River Trail for winter shutdown. It's one of the most remote hikes in the park's steep, narrow, and lined with towering evergreens. We'd already been up and down it countless times, but that day felt off. It began with a missing hiker. Dylan Knox, early 20s, went out alone and never came back. His girlfriend had reported him missing, and Earl called it in while I took point on the search. I found his jacket first, bright red, hanging from a tree like someone had placed it there intentionally. Next came his backpack, carelessly tossed off the trail. When I opened it, his ID stared up at me like a warning. As I followed the trail deeper, the woods began to shift. The light dimmed, the trees pressed closer. It was then I stumbled upon a woman, unconscious and badly wounded, lying just off the path. I carried her to a clearing where medics could reach us. Before they arrived, she whispered something I won't forget. "Don't let it get me." She passed out before I could ask more. That evening, I returned to the trail. I had to find Dylan. Dusk had fallen and the forest turned eerie. That's when I saw it, a figure watching from the trees. Tall, too thin, its limbs too long, skin pale and reflective, like bone under moonlight. It didn't move, just watched. I raised my flashlight, and the thing hissed, vanishing into the shadows. I ran. When I got back, Earl didn't question my state. I must have looked shaken because he just said, "We'll go back in the morning." At dawn, we hiked back to where I found the woman. We picked up strange tracks, human-like but stretched. Not bear, not cougar. Something else. The tracks led to a cave hidden behind a wall of vines. We didn't speak. We just drew our flashlights and entered. The air was heavy and wet. The walls dripped with moisture and strange symbols, twisting patterns that shifted when we weren't looking directly at them. Then came the sound, shuffling, breathing, something ahead. Our lights cut through the dark. The creature was crouched over something on the cave floor. It was Dylan, alive, barely. The creature raised its head, its eyes twin voids, empty yet seeing everything. It hissed and lunged. Earl fired, deafening in the cave, and the creature shrieked, slamming into the walls. It retreated, but we could hear it stalking us. We carried Dylan out together. It followed. Every few minutes, a hiss or claw against stone reminded us we were not safe. As we burst from the cave into sunlight, Earl fired one last shot. The creature howled and retreated. Dylan survived physically. Mentally, I'm not sure. He left the state and never spoke of what happened. Earl and I started calling it the Pale Stalker, but we kept quiet. Officially, the park blamed a bear. Months passed. Winter came. Reports started piling up. Eerie calls in the night. A pale figure watching from the trees. We stepped up patrols. We never returned to that cave. One morning, I followed fresh tracks in the snow. They led to a clearing with a single white tree, hanging from one branch, a piece of Dylan's red jacket. This thing hadn't left. We dug into old records, stories, native legends. One name kept appearing, the Pale Walker, a creature older than memory, a guardian or a predator. No one agreed. Just that if you heard it, saw it, and survived, you were changed. Spring brought new visitors, more sightings. Then another scream in the woods. I found a woman cornered. The Pale Stalker closing in. I hit it with bear spray. It shrieked and retreated. We escaped. That was the tipping point. The park issued vague warnings about an unidentified predator. Teams of scientists, cryptozoologists, even mystics arrived. They found nothing, but we knew. I still work here. I patrol the trails, and sometimes at the edge of the forest, I see those black eyes staring back. If you come to our park, stay on the trails. Don't go alone. And if the woods fall quiet, leave. because it's still out there, waiting. My name is Jacob Riley, and I was a fire lookout stationed at Whisper Pines in the Blue Ridge Mountains during the summer of 2021. I've never told anyone the full story, not the Forest Service, not my family, not even the guy I used to share beers with every other weekend back then. I didn't want to be laughed off as another ranger gone stir-crazy, but what happened up there wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't stress or isolation. It was real, and it's still out there. Whisper Pines is one of the most remote towers in the entire region. It's not open to the public, not even to volunteers. You need clearance to go up there, and once you do, you're expected to be alone for long stretches of time. My rotation was 3 weeks on, 1 week off. You bring your own food, your own books, your own sanity. It's peaceful most of the time, quiet if a little eerie. The tower rises above an ocean of dark green treetops. On clear days you can see for miles, but at night, that place turns into something else entirely. My first 2 weeks were uneventful. Long days of logging weather patterns and scanning the horizon with my binoculars. No lightning strikes, no hikers gone missing. Just me, the trees, and the hum of cicadas. But everything changed on the 15th night. T was around 2:40 a.m. when I woke up to a noise. Not a loud bang or crash, but something subtle. A voice, whispering. At first I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again clearer this time. A woman's voice, soft and hushed, like she was standing just below the floorboards of the tower. Help me. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, straining to listen. Nothing. Just the groan of the wind and the distant rustle of branches. I told myself it had to be the breeze playing tricks on me, maybe some birds nesting below. But I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning I checked the area around the tower. No tracks, no signs of animals. The underbrush was undisturbed. But something felt off, like the air was charged, the way it feels before a storm. That night, the whispering came again. This time there were 2 voices. Jacob, one of them said. It was the same soft, feminine voice, but now it knew my name. Then a second voice, deeper, raspier, male. He's listening now. I bolted upright, heart pounding in my chest. I scanned the base of the tower with my flashlight, my beam sweeping across the grass and tree trunks, but nothing moved. The forest looked undisturbed, but that whisper, it had come from right beneath me. I didn't sleep the rest of that week. By the 3rd night of whispering, I started keeping the generator running all night just to drown out the sound. But even then, sometimes I could still hear them just beneath the hum of the engine. I kept telling myself it had to be wind in the trees, stress, isolation, but deep down I knew better. I'd been up in towers before. I'd heard all kinds of wildlife. This wasn't that. On day 17, I climbed down and hiked out toward a nearby ridge to clear my head. It was early evening, maybe an hour before dusk. The sun cast long shadows through the forest, painting the mossy ground in deep golds and blacks. That's when I saw the first marker, a tree stripped of its bark in a perfect circle about 4 feet up. with a small pile of white stones stacked neatly at its base. The odd thing? I'd been down this trail a dozen times and never noticed it before. Curious and more than a little creeped out, I followed the markers, one every 50 yards or so. Always the same pattern, stripped tree, white stones. They led me to a clearing I'd never seen on any map. Dead center was a wide depression in the earth, almost like a sinkhole, but perfectly circular. No water, no debris, just soft black soil, and that same whispering again, like it was seeping up from the ground itself. I turned and left immediately, the hair on my neck standing straight up. That night I woke up to the sound of someone or something climbing the stairs of the tower. Slow, measured, creaking each step with deliberate weight. I grabbed my flashlight and knife and waited by the door. My breath was tight in my chest, heart rattling in my ribs. But when I flung the door open, the stairs were empty. No one was there. But the last few steps were wet, dark prints of something barefoot and human-shaped. The final 3 nights were the worst. I began hearing footsteps outside, sometimes circling the tower, sometimes stopping beneath it for hours at a time. Never walking away, just standing. On the 20th night, I finally snapped. I screamed down into the trees. "Who are you? What do you want?" No response, until I heard it, a single, distant whisper, carried not by the wind, but by something else. "We remember you." I packed my gear that night, even though protocol forbids leaving early without clearance. I radioed in a mechanical failure and hiked out at first light, ignoring every protocol I'd spent years memorizing. They let me go, transferred me to a lowland station near a campground. I haven't been back to Whisper Pines since. A few months later, I got a call from one of the rookies who took over my tower. He lasted 10 days. Said he woke up to whispers. Said he found the white stones. They pulled him out after he carved something into the walls of the lookout with a hunting knife. One sentence: "It lives beneath us." I don't know what it is, if it's alive or dead or something in between, but I know the forest holds it, buries it, and I know the more people who go up there, the louder it gets. So if you ever get assigned to a tower, especially Whisper Pines, just remember, some things in the forest aren't meant to be found. And when you hear the whispering, don't answer, because once they know your name, they never forget it. My name's Nathan Reed. I've been with the Forest Service going on 12 years now, mostly stationed out in Central Oregon. If you've never spent time in the forests up here, it's hard to explain. It's not just the vastness, it's the weight of it. The trees are old, ancient. Some of the Douglas firs tower over 200 feet. There are stretches of wilderness so dense and untouched that they don't feel like part of the modern world at all. Which brings me to this story. I wasn't planning to tell anyone about what happened last fall. It's one of those experiences that doesn't come out clean when you try to put it into words. But lately, I've been having trouble sleeping. And I keep seeing it again when I close my eyes, the tower, the girl, the thing that moved like it didn't belong in this world. So here goes. I was assigned a 2-week rotation monitoring fire conditions from an old tower near a place called Devil's Hollow. It's a deep ravine surrounded by high ridge lines and a tangled mess of logging trails long since overgrown. The tower itself hadn't been used in decades. Maybe, but the Forest Service wanted a warm body up there for observation after a particularly dry summer. It wasn't a glamorous assignment, but I didn't mind the solitude. I packed light, just the basics. Food, radio, topo maps, a good flashlight, and my old .357. I kept more for bears than anything else. The hike in was rougher than expected. The trail was half swallowed by the undergrowth, and the further I went, the quieter everything seemed to get. You notice that out here. The forest changes when something's wrong. Birds go quiet. Wind dies down. It's like the woods are holding their breath. The fire tower sat on the far side of a ridge, accessed by a narrow wooden stairwell that creaked and swayed with every step. The place was run down but functional. I spent my first day sweeping it out and taking stock of the area with binoculars. The view was incredible acres and acres of dark green hills and fog-choked valleys. The first 2 nights were uneventful. The radio stayed quiet, and the only sounds were the usual ones, owls, raccoons, the groan of wood under the wind. I drank instant coffee, and logged observations by the hour. But on the 3rd night, things changed. It was just after 2 a.m. when I woke up. Something had thudded against the base of the tower. Not loud, just enough to jolt me out of sleep. At first I thought it was wind or maybe a branch falling, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching in the dirt. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. Who the hell would be out here at this hour? The trail wasn't marked. No hikers should have been this deep, and I hadn't seen another person since I left the service road. I grabbed my flashlight and unlatched the hatch door at my feet. Quietly, I lowered the beam down through the slats in the floor. I couldn't see anyone, but I could still hear movement circling the tower now. Then a voice. It was faint, female. Help me. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a scream or a panicked cry. It was flat, hollow, like the voice didn't quite know what the words meant. Help me, please. I called out, asking who was down there. No answer. Just that same phrase again, a little louder this time, but off, like a recording on a loop. I pulled on my boots and grabbed the revolver. Against every instinct I had, I descended the stairs. The forest was pitch black, my flashlight barely piercing the mist. I called out again. Nothing. Then I saw her. A young woman, maybe 20 feet into the tree line. Pale skin, long black hair, hanging wet over her face. She was barefoot, wearing what looked like an old flannel nightgown. Just standing there. Ma'am, are you injured? I asked, stepping forward. She didn't move, didn't even blink. Do you need help? That's when she smiled, and then vanished. Not ran, not walked. One blink and she was gone, like the fog swallowed her whole. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning I radioed in and asked if any campers or lost hikers had been reported in the area. Dispatch said no. No one should have been within 15 miles of my tower. I should have left then, but I didn't. I convinced myself I was tired, that I'd imagined it, Sleep deprivation messes with your head. But the next night, it happened again. This time I heard something climbing the stairs. Not walking, crawling. Slow, scraping fingernails against the wood. I stood over the hatch, gun in hand, heart thudding like a war drum. It stopped just beneath me. I waited. Nothing. Then came a sound I will never forget as long as I live. Tap, tap, tap. Knuckles against the hatch. I backed away, breath ragged, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Slowly I knelt and flipped open the hatch, revolver raised. Empty stairs. But the last 3 steps were wet. Like someone had been bleeding. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the far corner of the tower, weapon pointed at the hatch, jumping at every creak. When morning came, I hiked down and checked the stairs. No blood, no prints, just those wet marks now dried and dark. That night I set up a perimeter with my remaining flares. I didn't sleep at all. Around 3 a.m., I saw movement in the trees again. Same woman, same nightgown. Only this time she was smiling wide, her head tilted at a sharp angle like her neck had snapped. Her mouth opened wider than it should have, and she screamed. Except no sound came out. Her body convulsed as if shrieking, but the forest stayed silent. I fired a shot. Not at her into the air. She didn't flinch, just stared. And then she vanished again. That was my last night in Devil's Hollow. When the relief ranger arrived the next day, I didn't even wait for the debrief. I hiked out without looking back. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? I took a desk job 2 months later. I still have dreams about the tower, about the hatch creaking open on its own, about those steps in the fog. I wake up sweating, gasping for air. Some nights, I swear, I hear her outside my apartment window. A soft knock. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I don't open the blinds anymore. I don't think that place ever let me go. My name is James Walker. I was a ranger in Olympic National Park in September of 2012 when something happened that changed me forever. I've held on to this story for over a decade, too afraid of what people would say, or worse, what they wouldn't believe. But time has a way of loosening fear's grip, and before I leave this world, I want the truth out there. Back then, I had been with the Park Service for 5 years. I loved the job. The solitude, the old-growth forests, the feeling of being completely swallowed by the wilderness. Olympic wasn't like other parks. It had an ancient, almost mythical presence. The deeper you went into the whole rainforest, the more it felt like you'd stepped out of time altogether. I was assigned a trail maintenance routine stuff, just me, a pack, and a map. I hiked out 12 miles or so into the backcountry and set up camp in a clearing by the river. That first evening was uneventful. I cooked a freeze-dried dinner, read by headlamp for a while, and then turned in for the night. Just after midnight I heard it. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer. But then I heard it again, a wet, choking sob. It sounded human. Protocol says you check on distress calls, even deep in the woods. So I grabbed my rifle and a flashlight, and I followed the sound. The underbrush was thick and wet, the kind of place where sound bounces strangely. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. Just a scuffling sound, like something dragging through the ferns. I stepped forward. That's when it hit me. A blur of limbs and fur knocked me flat on my back. My rifle skidded away into the brush. I got a brief glimpse, too many teeth, long claws, and a smell like rotting meat and chemical burn. I kicked hard, scrambled for my weapon, and fired. It shrieked an awful, metallic sound and vanished into the trees. I radioed it in. HQ thought it was a bear, maybe a cougar with mange. I knew better. And I wasn't the only one. 2 years later, I heard about Elias Harper, a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. His encounter mirrored mine, though his ended far worse. He tracked a missing hiker deep into the foggy backcountry and found more than just a corpse. He found something waiting for him, something that stalked him like prey and nearly tore him apart. He survived, barely. Said the thing had glowing amber eyes and skin stretched over bone like a corpse. He told me in a hushed voice over beers that it didn't move like an animal. It moved like it had purpose, like it had intelligence. I believed him, because I'd seen those eyes too, years past. I took a desk job in Seattle, hoping to forget. But I couldn't. The nightmares stayed. Sometimes I swear I still hear that screech, just beneath the city noise. Then, in 2016, another ranger reached out. Ronald Hall, Yellowstone. His story chilled me to the bone. He'd worked there for years, knew every inch of that place. But that fall, something changed. Hikers went missing. Tracks appeared in places that should have been inaccessible, and the smell of sweet rot and decay followed him like a shadow. He found a body, torn to pieces, gnawed in ways that made no sense. Not a bear, not any animal he'd ever seen. And then the feds showed up, black SUVs, unmarked uniforms. They took over the scene and told him to forget it. He tried, but then came the sightings, figures in the trees, eyes in the dark, a massive shape, fluid and silent, watching from the pines, and the smell always the smell. Then one night he saw it. It watched him from the trees. Too tall, too thin. It moved like water through shadow. And when their eyes locked, Ronald said he felt true fear for the first time in his life. He tried to report it, but what could he say? That Yellowstone had a monster in its woods? The Park Service brushed it off, but the other rangers, they knew. Jenna, his partner, started sleeping with a loaded shotgun next to her cot. Others stopped patrolling alone. And the sightings kept coming. Back in Olympic, I started connecting the dots. Stories whispered over beers and under low campfires. Rangers in Maine, Colorado, California. All with the same story. Same creature, same smell. Same eyes. We call it different things. The skin's nature. The hollow man. But it's all the same thing. Something ancient. Something hungry. Something that waits in the deep woods. It doesn't always kill. Sometimes it just watches, follows, moves your gear when you aren't looking, leaves things, takes things. It's toying with you, testing you. Elias told me once, it doesn't just live in the forest, it is the forest. It moves with it, hides inside it. I'm telling this now because I'm done being afraid. Because someday someone else will find themselves deep in the woods, alone, hearing that choking sob just beyond the trees. So here's my warning. If you're hiking in the back country and the forest suddenly goes quiet, leave. If you smell something sweet and rotten, turn back. And if you see glowing yellow eyes in the dark, run. Don't look back, because it's watching, and it remembers the ones who escaped. My name is Daniel Reeves, and this is a true account of what happened to me in September of 2012 while I was working as a park ranger in Olympic National Park. I've kept this to myself for years, but now in the later stretch of my life, I feel an obligation to share it. If nothing else, maybe it'll serve as a warning, a reminder that not everything in the wilderness is meant to be understood. I'd been a ranger in Olympic for just over 5 years at that point. The job suited me perfectly. I loved the dense rainforests, the remoteness, that unique sense of stepping into a world apart from everything else. But the whole rainforest is a different kind of remote. The trees here are ancient, thick with moss, and the air feels heavy. Sound gets swallowed up by the underbrush. The canopy barely lets in sunlight. Getting lost isn't just easy, it's expected if you don't know the land. I was assigned to solo trail maintenance for 2 days. It was standard protocol, nothing unusual for a ranger who knew the backcountry. The first day went as expected. I cut back thick overgrowth, cleared fallen limbs, and made camp in a small clearing beside a river. Dinner was a freeze-dried pouch heated over a tiny stove, and I settled in with a paperback and my headlamp as night fell. Then I heard it. It wasn't a cougar, wasn't a bear. I know those sounds intimately. This was something different. Something that started like a sob, broken and desperate. Then a dragging sound, like something struggling through the brush. We're trained to respond to distress calls, but deep in the wilderness, you move carefully. You respect that the forest has rules of its own. Still, the sound put my nerves on edge in a way I hadn't felt in years. I grabbed my rifle, clicked off the safety, and stepped into the undergrowth. The further I moved, the quieter the forest seemed to become. Every branch creaked louder. My own footsteps felt muffled, and then something thrashed in the brush. "Hello, anyone there?" I called out. No response, just more rustling, then movement fast and low to the ground. The thing pounced. It hit me hard, knocking me flat on my back. My rifle went flying. In a blur, I saw limbs too long for a bear and fur that stank of rot. But what I remember most were its eyes, large, amber, and filled with a hatred I've never seen in an animal. It screamed a noise that made the hairs on my neck rise and lunged for my throat. I rolled, grabbing blindly for my rifle, found it, fired. The shot hit, I know it did. Blood sprayed across a nearby tree, but the thing didn't go down. It circled me, growling, bleeding, breathing heavily, like it was calculating something. Then I saw it fully. It was too lean to be a bear, with skin stretched over ribs that jutted through fur in patches. The head was canid, but distorted, elongated, and filled with far too many teeth. It stalked like a predator, but the look in its eyes held something more, something aware. I fired again. This time it flinched and retreated into the trees, vanished in seconds. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed by the fire with my rifle across my lap, every shadow twisting into a nightmare. When I reported it, nobody believed me. They said maybe I saw a diseased bear or a coyote with mange. But 3 days later, a team went out and found the blood, found the marks. They didn't say much after that. I transferred soon after, moved to a desk job in Seattle. I haven't set foot in a forest alone since. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that screech faint, but sharp enough to raise goosebumps. Sometimes I see those amber eyes outside my apartment window. And I know I wasn't hallucinating. I know that thing is still out there. In the years since, I've met others with similar stories. Another ranger, Thomas Eller, from the Smokies. His encounter happened in 2016, and though the details were different, the fear in his voice when he told it matched mine exactly. We talked once, over a grainy phone call. He mentioned yellow eyes, elongated limbs, intelligence that felt unnatural. That same rot smell. I know what I saw, and so does Thomas. So if you find yourself deep in the backcountry, and the forest goes still too still, and a terrible smell rolls in with the mist, don't look for what made it. Just run, because the forest doesn't want you to see it. And if you do, it might not let you leave. It was supposed to be a weekend reset. Just me, my gear, and the woods. I had driven out to Bald Eagle State Forest, north-central Pennsylvania. Not too far from home, but remote enough to get lost in if you weren't careful. I'd camped there a few times before, and it had always been peaceful. Maybe a little too quiet, but peaceful. I brought a lightweight tent, fire starter, basic rations, and a beat-up copy of the Mothman Prophecies to kill time. I was in between jobs, going stir-crazy, and I just needed space from the world. I should have trusted that first feeling when I pulled off the service road and saw the ranger station shuttered. I didn't think much of it. Maybe budget cuts. I parked my SUV at the usual lot, slung my pack over one shoulder, and started the long hike toward a clearing I'd used before. It was about 3 miles in, tucked between thick pine groves and an old, moss-covered stone outcrop that looked like a crumbled altar. I set up camp by late afternoon. Fire going, tarp staked, everything in order. The woods were dead quiet. I thought maybe it was just the cold front moving in animals get weird when the pressure drops. But it was that type of silence. Not peaceful, not natural. Like the trees were holding their breath. Around 9 p.m., I was wrapped in my sleeping bag, sipping lukewarm coffee from a metal cup, when I heard something. A click. That's the only way I can describe it. A deliberate click, like a tongue snapping against the roof of a mouth. It echoed across the clearing, bouncing between trunks. I turned off my headlamp and waited. Nothing, just wind. Maybe an animal, maybe branches. Then came another click, closer, followed by a long, slow inhale. Not mine. I sat up in the dark, heart already pounding, gripping the hunting knife I kept beside my sleeping pad. The fire had mostly burned down, leaving red coals. Everything was still. Then, crunch. Not like twigs under a deer, this was heavier, deliberate. I whispered into the dark. Who's there? Nothing, not even an echo. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the edge of the clearing. My beam caught something briefly low to the ground, like pale skin stretched over knobby joints. And then it was gone. I stayed up the rest of the night, blade in hand, back against the tent wall. By sunrise, I'd convinced myself it had been a dream or an animal I hadn't recognized. Sleep deprivation paranoia. I packed up fast, no breakfast, just shoved my gear into my pack and started the hike back out. Here's the thing, I couldn't find the trail. It should have been about 50 yards south, just past the tree shaped like a wishbone. But it wasn't there. I walked in the same direction for almost 15 minutes, thinking I must have veered off slightly. But the trail never came. That's when I found the trees. Carved into them were symbols, circles with diagonal lines overlapping X's, burned into the bark in some places, scratched in others. Not random, intentional. I stopped walking. My ears rang. There was no wind, no insects, no birds. That same suffocating silence. Then the smell hit me. Rot, like a wet animal carcass left out for days. I backed away, gagging, and that's when I saw the shape between the trees. It was hunched low to the ground, arms longer than its legs. Skin gray, hairless. Its face had no eyes, just black slits where the nose should be, and a mouth that stretched too wide across its face, split open in a grin that showed far too many teeth. It mimicked my last breath. That inhale I'd made seconds before it repeated it perfectly, mocking me. Then it moved. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. I know I cut my leg jumping over a fallen log, and at one point I dropped my pack. I didn't stop. Not until I hit the stream. I followed it downstream for what felt like hours, until I found something unnatural. 2 stone pillars standing in the middle of the woods, covered in moss and symbols like the ones on the trees. Between them was a narrow path of pine needles perfectly cleared. No branches, no rocks. Just a clean trail leading deeper into the forest. I should have turned around, but I was delirious with fear, convinced it might lead me out. I walked that path for maybe 5 minutes before I saw it again. This time it wasn't crouching. It stood tall. Over 7 feet, thin, emaciated, bones visible beneath stretched skin. Its mouth hung open, twitching. But it didn't attack. It pointed. Its arm raised, slowly, and pointed toward the trail behind me. Then it whispered, "Leave." Its voice sounded like it came from inside my head, layered over itself like a dozen voices speaking at once. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. This time I found the stream again, and when I followed it, I eventually emerged into the parking lot I'd left my SUV in. Only the sun was setting again. That hike should have taken 2 hours tops. Somehow I'd been out there for over 24. I drove home in silence, checking my mirrors every few minutes like I expected it to be in the back seat. But some reports go back over 200 years sightings of this smiling watcher in bald eagle. Always appears after dusk, always watches first, rarely speaks, almost never lets anyone go. I'm one of the lucky ones, I guess, but sometimes at night I still hear it. That click, that breath, and once, just once, found pine needles on my apartment floor. I don't have any plants, no trail gear inside, just a few dozen dry, dead needles in a perfect trail from the window to the bedroom door. I swept them up and tried to forget, but if you ever go hiking near Bald Eagle and the woods fall too quiet, listen. If you hear the click, it's already watching, and if it ever speaks, run. I've hiked all over the country, from the Sierra Nevadas to the remote corners of the Adirondacks, but there's one place I'll never return to, Bitterroot Ridge, deep in the Allegheny National Forest. I went there alone in late September of 2022. I was working on a photo series called Forgotten Trails Capturing Overgrown Paths, Moss-Covered Trail Markers, and wilderness areas that had been swallowed by time. I had a lead on an old hunter's trail that hadn't been maintained since the 1970s. Some forums said it was haunted. Others said it didn't exist. It exists. I arrived in the small town of Hemlock Falls late Friday afternoon. One diner, one gas station, and a few sagging houses lost in the trees. A ranger at the station warned me off going too far up the ridge, said storms had downed trees, and GPS barely worked out there. I lied and said I'd stay close. The first few miles were uneventful, peaceful, even. Cold air, golden leaves, the crunch of damp pine needles underfoot. I found faint trail blazes along birch trunks, faded and almost erased by time, but they led me deeper. I felt excited, like I was uncovering a piece of forgotten history. My camera captured deer tracks, old rusted traps, even a fallen hunting blind. By nightfall, I made camp in a clearing by a stream. That first night I heard humming. It started faint. I thought it was wind in the trees, or maybe a bear grumbling in the distance. But the tone was steady. It almost sounded like a woman's voice, low and rhythmic, like a lullaby. I stood outside my tent with my flashlight, scanning the woods. Nothing. No footprints, no animals. But the air smelled strange, wet, and metallic, like blood in a rainstorm. I barely slept. The next morning I woke up to find 4 smooth stones arranged in a circle just outside my tent flap. Small, river-washed. I hadn't seen them the night before. It freaked me out. I packed up fast and told myself I'd head back to the car. Only I couldn't find the trail. The blazes were gone, like the trees had moved. I spent the entire day walking, trying to retrace my steps. I found the same stream 3 separate times. At one point I passed a fallen log with a carving that read, "We drink light." I hadn't seen it before. The sun set too fast. The woods got colder. The silence got heavier. I heard the humming again, closer this time. No animals. Not even crickets. I set up camp in the most open space I could find and kept the fire going all night. At some point, I don't know when, I must have dozed off. I woke to wet breathing right beside my tent. Not animal breathing, human, but off. Too deep, gurgling. I froze. Then a slow dragging sound circled the tent, like bare feet moving through wet leaves. Something brushed against the fabric. A finger, maybe. Or a claw. Then you found us. It whispered from just beyond the tent wall. The voice was neither male nor female. Just wrong, flat, like it was mimicking language without understanding it. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just waited until the first light of dawn turned the tent a shade lighter. I unzipped it slowly. No one was there, but the stones were again, this time in a line pointing north, and I followed. I don't know why. Maybe I was panicking. Maybe it had taken something from me in the night, something deeper than sense. But I walked that line of stones, each spaced exactly 20 paces apart. After what felt like an hour, I found it, the circle. In a hollow beneath the ridge, hidden by twisted trees, was a perfect ring of standing stones 10 feet high, smoothed by weather, carved with faint spirals and symbols I didn't recognize. At the center was a depression in the ground, shallow, maybe 6 feet across, lined with moss and something that looked like old, cracked bone. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped into the center. It was like the world dropped away. Silence. Deeper than anything I'd ever known. Even the air felt still. Then the humming started again. This time inside my head, vibrating behind my eyes. I saw flashes, images, faces, places I'd never been. A figure cloaked in black bark, pale hands reaching out of the ground, a sky filled with black crows, wings frozen mid-flap. Then the circle pulsed, and I dropped to my knees. When I came to, it was dark again. The fire in my camp was dead. My camera was missing, so was my compass. My boots were soaked, and my clothes were caked in mud. I had no memory of how I'd gotten back, but something had followed. I saw it once more before I made it out. It stood behind a tree about 40 feet away, tall, too thin, skin like stone. Its eyes glowed faintly. It didn't move, just watched, and in my mind I heard it again. "We drink light," I sprinted. I don't know how I got out, but I stumbled onto the side of the forest road, near where I'd parked. My SUV was covered in fallen leaves and had a layer of dew, like it had been sitting there for days. I had only been gone 2. Back in town, the ranger looked surprised to see me. Said the last few hikers who went up Bitter Root never came back. That was 1.5 years ago. I still haven't looked at the photos from that trip. I found my memory card jammed into a tree branch in my backyard 2 weeks after I returned home. Just there, sitting in the oak above my deck. My camera was still gone. I've heard the humming twice since. Always at night. Always around 3:33 a.m. Once I woke to find 4 smooth stones on my bedroom floor, arranged in a perfect circle. I've vacuumed them up. I don't go into the woods anymore, not even parks. I get nauseous near pine trees. I've canceled the Forgotten Trails project. That part of my life is over. If you ever find yourself near Bitter Root Ridge and the forest gets too quiet, don't follow the stones. Don't enter the circle. Because whatever they are, they don't forget the ones who step inside. My name's Caleb, and I'm not the type to scare easy. I've spent most of my life in the woods. My dad was a forestry surveyor in northern Vermont, and I followed in his footsteps. I know how the forest moves, how it breathes. I've walked through deep snow and fog so thick it choked the light, heard the distant howls of coyotes in places with no name. I know what it's like to feel truly alone. But until last fall, I didn't know what it was like to feel watched. I was doing a personal solo hike along the Grover Ridge Trail, an old fire road that cuts through about 15 miles of hardwood forest up near the Canadian border. The whole thing was spontaneous. I just left a contract job downstate and had a couple of free weeks before the next one started. No obligations, no clients, no emails. Just a pack, a tent, and a trail. I started off late in the afternoon, but I figured I'd make camp just a few miles in. It was October, and the days were shorter, which made the entire ridge blaze gold and red. I remember how the wind whispered through the birch trees as I crossed a small creek and found a decent flat stretch just off the trail. I set up camp, got a fire going, and cooked a quick meal. The first night was peaceful. Still air, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot from a barred owl. I slept well. It was the second day that changed everything. Around midday, I veered off the trail to follow a ridgeline I'd never seen before. The topographic map didn't show anything notable, but there was something about the slope that caught my eye. A narrow line of stones cut through the fallen leaves, following the incline like an old, forgotten path. It wasn't a maintained trail, just a series of flat, square stones maybe 2 feet wide, spaced evenly apart, leading up the ridge and into a denser patch of forest. I should have turned around, but curiosity overruled caution. I started up the slope, boots crunching the dry leaves. The stones were slick, covered in patches of moss and decay, but they were unmistakably placed. Too regular to be natural. They weren't granite or anything local either, more like shale, dark and fine-edged. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest grew. And I mean quiet, no birds, no insects. Just the sound of my breathing and the crunch of my boots. Even the wind had stopped. By the time I reached the top of the ridge, I realized I couldn't see the trail anymore. I looked back, but the stones didn't lead back the way I'd come. They just ended behind me in a scatter of roots and leaves. The path was gone. I stood there a minute, trying to wrap my head around it. I knew the layout of the ridge. I had a GPS and a compass, but the coordinates weren't lining up with where I should have been. Then I smelled it, something metallic and damp, like rusted iron and rotting leaves. And then the whispering started. At first, it sounded like wind through dead branches, but there was no wind. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, and that's when I saw the figure. It was standing maybe 20 yards ahead, in the gloom beneath a cluster of dying maple trees, tall, unmoving, dressed in something long and tattered, that blended with the bark and underbrush. Its face was obscured, but I could feel it staring at me. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't panic, not right away. I told myself I was tired, maybe dehydrated, that it was a shadow or my brain playing tricks on me. I took a drink, sat down on a fallen log, and checked my gear. The compass spun lazily, never settling. The GPS blinked back an error. Signal lost. That's when the unease set in. I'd seen malfunctions before, but this felt deliberate, like the forest itself didn't want me to leave. I stood up and tried to backtrack. I used the sun as best I could, estimating southwest toward the original trail, but no matter how far I walked, the terrain didn't change. The forest just kept repeating same ridges, same dead trees, same patchy canopy. At some point I came upon the stone path again. I swear I had been walking in a straight line for an hour, but there it was, those same dark stones trailing off through the brush like they had been waiting for me. I followed them again, thinking maybe they'd lead me out. Maybe they were some forgotten trail system, but they didn't lead out. They led me to the clearing. It was a perfect circle, about 30 feet wide, with a ring of flat black stones forming its boundary. Nothing grew inside, not even moss. The soil was gray and powdery, like ash. In the center was a single stone slab, like an altar, and carved into it was a spiral symbol that hurt to look at. I stepped forward, and the whispering surged, louder now, layered, like dozens of voices all speaking over one another. The air thickened, pressure building behind my ears. I dropped my pack and turned to run, and that's when I saw it again, closer this time, still and silent, watching me from beyond the stones. It didn't move like a living thing. It shifted, like smoke trapped in a human shape. No face, no features, just two hollow eye sockets that shimmered in the dim light. I didn't think. I ran. I don't remember how long or how far. The woods blurred around me. I tripped more than once, tore up my knees and elbows, but I didn't stop until I crashed down the slope and nearly stumbled into a familiar downed tree near the main trail. When I saw the marker, an old U.S. Forestry Service blaze, I almost cried. I camped near the trail that night, too scared to sleep. I kept the fire high and the compass close, but it didn't settle until long after midnight. I made it back to my car the next day. Since then, I've searched every public and private trail record in the region. There's no mention of a stone path or a clearing like the one I found. The coordinates I marked on the GPS don't exist, just blank spots on the map. I've talked to other hikers, even a few locals. Most shrug it off, but one older guy, he ran a bait shop near the edge of town, went real quiet when I mentioned the spiral on the stone. Some places aren't meant to be found, he said. You're lucky you made it back. I don't know what I found in that forest, or what found me, but I've never gone off trail since. Not once, because every now and then when I'm walking alone in the woods, I still hear that whisper on the wind, and I remember the stone path that shouldn't exist. My name's Evan. This happened 6 years ago, and even now, I still can't walk past an abandoned building without feeling a tightness in my chest. It was late October when my older brother Sam invited me to go deer hunting with him out in Clay County, Tennessee. We used to go every fall with our uncle, but after he passed, the tradition faded. That year, though, Sam had leased some land from a friend of his, a retired logger who still owned a couple hundred acres of forest bordering an old cattle farm. The land hadn't been maintained in years. No power, no running water, just forest, old fence lines, and some crumbling buildings from back when the farm was operational. Sam said it would be perfect, peaceful, undisturbed. A good place to set up camp for a long weekend. I was skeptical, but I missed spending time with him, so I agreed. We got there around noon on Friday. The access road was barely drivable, rutted dirt and broken tree limbs, but we managed to get my Tacoma close enough to hike the rest of the way in with our gear. The place was secluded, I'll give him that. Old maples towered over us, and you could walk for hours in any direction without seeing another soul. Near the edge of the tree line stood a long, rotted barn and a squat, rust-colored building with a blackened chimney. It was windowless, made of concrete blocks, with a heavy metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Sam told me it used to be a smokehouse for meat, and he was thinking of turning it into a gear shed. That was our first mistake, disturbing it. We camped about 50 yards from the smokehouse. That first night was quiet. Crisp wind, the occasional crackle of the fire. Sam told stories about our uncle, and we drank warm whiskey and laughed more than I expected. But sometime after midnight I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Not an animal, not wind. It was a slow, deliberate creaking, like rusted hinges shifting under pressure. Then a soft metallic clang. It came from the direction of the smokehouse. I unzipped the tent, poked my head out. Sam was still asleep, snoring softly. The clearing was empty, no movement. But I swear, the smokehouse door was cracked open just a few inches. I closed the tent, chalked it up to a dream, and tried to fall back asleep. The next morning I asked Sam about it. He laughed. Ghosts in the smokehouse, huh? Should have told me that before I picked this place. We walked over to the building after breakfast. The door was shut again, but I noticed a thick line of soot across the ground where the door met the concrete. Something had scraped it open recently. Maybe an animal, Sam suggested. Raccoons, maybe a bear looking for shelter. But I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right. We didn't hunt that day. Just scouted and cut a few blinds for the next morning. As the sun started to go down, a thick fog rolled in, unnaturally fast. It crept through the trees and pooled in the clearing like smoke from a smoldering fire. I remember how still the air felt, like even the forest was holding its breath. That night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the fog or the silence, it was the smell. It drifted into our tent sometime after midnight. Not wood smoke, not the earthy scent of fall. It was sharp, chemical, like burnt hair and rotted meat. I tried to wake Sam, but he was out cold. I sat up, breathing shallow, staring toward the smokehouse. The fog was thicker now, glowing faintly in the moonlight. I could see something through it, a flickering orange light coming from inside the smokehouse. There were no windows, No way for light to shine through, but it was there, flickering like firelight, dancing on the fog. I made a mistake then. I got up. I left the tent and walked toward it. The smell grew stronger with every step, sickly sweet and wrong. My stomach churned. I reached the door, and against every ounce of reason I had, I pulled it open. The inside was pitch black, no fire, no glow, just the sound of my own breath echoing against the walls. Then I heard something move, a low, wet shuffle, like something dragging across concrete. I backed up fast, heart hammering in my chest. I slammed the door and ran back to the tent. Sam stirred as I climbed in. "Where the hell were you?" he mumbled. "Nowhere," I lied, "just checking something." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, the fog was gone. The air smelled clean, normal. Sam cooked breakfast and talked about hitting a trail down by the ridge. I told him I was sick. He offered to stay, but I insisted he go. I needed to be alone to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. But that afternoon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The smokehouse door was open again, just slightly. I crept toward it, clutching a hatchet we kept for chopping wood. I didn't intend to go inside, but something compelled me. That same flickering, light, dim, orange pulsed from within. I opened the door and stepped in. The air was thick, damp. The smell returned instantly, burned meat, rot, ash. I raised a flashlight, scanning the interior. Hooks hung from the ceiling, rusted and old. Chains lined the back wall. Black scorch marks covered the floor, and in the corner I saw something wrong. It looked like a body, not fresh, not skeletal, somewhere in between, curled fetal against the wall, naked and gray. I stepped closer, hand shaking, and then it moved. Its chest rose barely. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The beam rolled across the room, and for a brief moment it lit the far wall, and I saw dozens of claw marks etched into the concrete. Deep gouges, like something had been trying to crawl out. I bolted, ran into the woods. Didn't stop until I saw Sam hiking back up the trail, confused and pale-faced. He'd seen the fog, too. He'd heard the whispers. We didn't spend another night. We'd packed and left that evening, driving until we hit the first town with cell service and a diner. We never told anyone. 2 weeks later, Sam sent me a link to a news article. That old logger, the one who owned the land, had gone missing. His family found his truck at the property line, keys still in the ignition, blood on the dash. They never found his body. That smokehouse, I don't know what it was. A place of death, maybe. A trap. Something older than the land, hiding in the concrete and ash. We should have never opened it, and I've never set foot in Clay County since. My name's Nathan. I work as a field geologist for a private surveying firm. Most of the time, my job is fairly routine, checking soil samples, documenting erosion patterns, mapping topography before developers come in and ruin everything. But in May of 2019, I was sent to a small town in rural Kentucky, near the edge of the Daniel Boone National Forest, and I still don't have the words for what I saw out there, only what I felt. And what I barely survived, it started with a call from a construction foreman, said a sinkhole had opened up unexpectedly at the edge of a new subdivision. They'd poured the foundation for a cul-de-sac, and the ground had collapsed overnight, swallowing half a backhoe and a pallet of cinder blocks. Thought it might be an old cave system, which isn't unusual in that part of the state. They wanted someone on site to evaluate the soil integrity and confirm whether it was safe to keep building. So I packed my truck, grabbed my tools, and drove 4 hours southeast. The neighborhood was mostly empty, a few houses framed out, one finished with a for sale sign in front, paint barely dry. The rest was nothing but cleared lots, brush piles, and orange construction fencing. When I arrived, the crew had already been pulled from the site. The hole was about 30 feet wide and maybe twice as deep. Fresh earth surrounded the rim, jagged and raw like the ground had been torn open. I remember thinking the shape was odd, too round, too clean, like something had bored its way up from below instead of caving in naturally. I set up a perimeter, took some initial readings, and started documenting the strata. The edges were strange. Layers of limestone and shale where there shouldn't have been. Fossils warped in the rock like they'd been stretched. I chalked it up to regional anomalies. You learn not to jump to conclusions in this line of work. But when I set up the seismometer, I noticed a vibration, subtle, rhythmic, like a faint pulse coming from beneath the earth. I figured maybe it was groundwater or a residual tremor from the collapse. I stayed on site as the sun started to dip. I'd planned to camp nearby, maybe sleep in my truck, finish the readings at dawn. I'd done it a dozen times before. But around 8:30 p.m., the wind died, completely, like someone flipped a switch. I looked up and realized how quiet it had gotten. No crickets, no birds, no frogs from the nearby creek. Just a low, steady thrum from under the ground, almost like breathing. My gut told me to leave, to pack up and drive to the nearest motel, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd dealt with worse sights, old mines, unstable cliffs, even one sinkhole filled with buried trash and a dead cow. I set up my tent on a nearby patch of stable rock and tried to sleep, but the sound kept me awake. It wasn't a vibration anymore. It was a scratching sound, faint, inconsistent, but unmistakable. It came from the sinkhole. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding, staring into the dark. The hole was about 50 feet away. My floodlights were still on, casting long shadows across the site. And then I saw it. A shape, something moving just below the rim. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the tent, my boots crunching gravel as I approached. I told myself it was an animal, a coyote maybe, or a fox. But as I got closer, I froze. There were fingerprints in the fresh soil, long, narrow impressions, like human hands, except the fingers were wrong, longer than any hand should be, and there were 6 of them. I turned, scanned the area, and that's when I saw the hole at the base of the sinkhole, like a tunnel had been carved into the side, perfectly round, maybe 3 feet across, leading into the dark. Then the scratching came again, louder this time, closer. I backed away, heart in my throat, and something peeked out. It was fast, just a flash, grayish skin, long face, and two bulbous black eyes that reflected the floodlight. Then it ducked back. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't stop running until I hit the edge of the subdivision and reached my truck. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. They sent a deputy to check it out. Said they didn't find anything unusual, just some old fencing knocked down by a coyote, maybe. No signs of a break-in, no fresh tracks. Told me I probably saw a raccoon and scared myself into a frenzy. But here's the thing. When I went back the next morning to retrieve my gear, the hole was gone. Not the sinkhole, the tunnel, filled in, perfectly smoothed over, like it had never been there. The rim of the sinkhole was pristine, too pristine, like it had been repaired. My tent was still there, my gear, but the floodlights had been turned off, the wires neatly coiled beside them. And worst of all, the fingerprints were gone. But they'd been there. I know they had. One submitted my report. Advised them not to continue building. Said the ground was unstable, the layers inconsistent, possibly a collapsed underground chamber that could compromise the foundation. They ignored it. 6 months later, a house was built right over that spot. It's been resold twice. Owners never stay more than a year. I drove by once on a rainy afternoon last fall. The backyard had a small sinkhole, just a shallow depression in the grass. But there was a pattern to it, a circle, almost deliberate. I haven't been back since. Whatever crawled out of that hole, it wasn't natural. It wasn't meant to be found. And sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and swear I hear that scratching beneath the floorboards of my own home, like something burrowing slowly toward the surface, waiting. I've spent my entire life hiking the Appalachians. From my early teens, the forest has always been my place, more familiar than cities, more peaceful than anything man-made. I know the difference between a fox's cry and a bobcat's scream. I can tell when weather's about to shift just by the way the wind moves through the treetops. But nothing, not a lifetime out here, prepared me for what I found, or maybe what found me last fall under Hemlock Ridge. It started out as an ordinary 3-day solo, backpacking trip along a lesser-known trail that cut north through the Virginia Blue Ridge. I'd taken it before, years back, but the park had shut that section down after a series of rock slides made some switchbacks too dangerous. They hadn't reopened it since, but I knew the route and figured I'd be cautious. I left my truck near an old ranger station that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 90s. The first day was uneventful, if not beautiful, cool air, leaves just starting to change. The kind of soft golden light that makes you feel like the woods are glowing from the inside. By sunset, I had my hammock strung between 2 old pines near a quiet creek. Nothing but the occasional chirp of tree frogs and the rustle of squirrels above. I ate a quick meal, took a few notes in my journal, and turned in early. That night, something woke me up. It wasn't a sound at first, More like a feeling, like a shift in the air. I lay there, perfectly still, every hair on my body standing on end. One thought maybe I'd imagined it, until I heard a slow, deliberate step-dry leaves crunching underfoot. One step, then silence. I stayed frozen in the hammock, my eyes wide open, but useless in the darkness. Whatever it was didn't move again. Not for a while. But I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, waiting, listening. The night stretched out like a rubber band ready to snap. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a deer, maybe a black bear that caught my scent and lost interest. I told myself all the usual lies solo hikers tell themselves to keep sane. But then I noticed something. A single footprint about 30 feet from my campsite. Not a bear print, not a boot, barefoot, human. It was narrow and long, and the toes were weirdly splayed, like someone who hadn't worn shoes in years. It looked deep, too deep for someone as light as me. I kept moving faster than I normally would. Tried to convince myself it was just a hiker, someone else ignoring the closed trail signs. Maybe even a prank. Maybe. I was pushing toward Hemlock Ridge when I found the hollow. I hadn't seen it on any maps or remembered it from before, but there it was, a sudden dip in the forest floor that dropped into a shallow, bowl-shaped depression, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by tight clusters of hemlock trees. It was unnaturally quiet in there. No birds, no wind, just dead still. In the middle of the hollow stood what looked like a stone totem, 3 flat, moss-covered rocks stacked with strange care. On top of it, something was hanging, a small animal skull, tied in place with what looked like hair. I backed out of that hollow faster than I cared to admit. I didn't even stop for water. That night, I camped farther up the ridge. No fire, no hammock, just a sleeping bag against a mossy log where I could stay low and hidden. I didn't sleep. Not really. Not close, but not far either. Every now and then it would stop, go quiet for long stretches. Then I'd hear it again. The worst part, it never sounded like it was retreating, just watching, circling, testing. I clutched my knife in one hand, bear spray in the other. Neither made me feel better. When dawn finally came, the forest was still. But when I looked down the ridge toward the path I'd come from, I saw something. Scattered in a circle around the base of the tree I'd slept near were bones. Small ones, rabbits, squirrels, maybe a raccoon. Cleaned, picked bare, arranged in a perfect ring. That's when I broke. I packed up in 10 minutes and hiked for hours without stopping, cutting off the trail and bushwhacking in a straight line toward the nearest road I knew about. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't rest. I just moved. Late that afternoon, I stumbled across an old fence line, followed it until it met a gravel fire road, and finally made it back to my truck near dusk. I've never gone back. I tried looking up the hollow online, asked around some forums, and reached out to a couple locals who knew the ridge. One old-timer told me I must have wandered into one of them thinned spots. When I asked what that meant, he just said, places where the veil's thinner than it ought to be. You see things. Sometimes they see you back. I haven't camped alone since. I still love the forest, but I carry more than bear spray now. And sometimes when I'm on a familiar trail and the wind dies all at once, when the birds go quiet, when the air feels suddenly wrong, I turn around because I know now some things walk this earth that don't leave footprints, but they remember yours. I wasn't looking for anything when I found Black Hollow. I was just trying to get away from everything work stress, bills piling up, the death of my dog 2 weeks prior. I needed the silence. So I drove into southern West Virginia, way past the marked trails, into one of the quietest places I could find on the map. The forest there was ancient. Steep ridgelines blanketed in pine, shadowy hollows filled with hemlock, and thick patches of rhododendron. No cell service, no road noise, no signs of human presence. Just the chirp of cicadas and the occasional rustle of deer. Perfect. I parked at an old turnout near a hunting access road, hoisted my pack, and followed a barely visible game trail down into a shaded valley that locals called Black Hollow. I'd only heard of it once, years ago in a bar. Some old guy said his uncle wouldn't even hunt near there, called it cursed land, said even the animals avoided it. I thought it was just superstition. By the time I made camp near the creek at the bottom of the hollow, the sun was already dipping below the ridge. I strung up my tarp between 2 spruce trees, made a small fire, and boiled water for some freeze-dried chili. The first night was quiet, eerily so. I slept light. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the fire still glowing dimly and the unmistakable sound of sticks breaking somewhere uphill. I sat up slowly, listening. No breeze, no bugs, just complete stillness followed by a slow, heavy step. Then another, and another. My heart kicked up in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the ridge, but the beam barely pierced the dense brush beyond my camp. Whatever it was, it stopped moving. I stood there in my boots and thermals, holding my breath, listening for any sign of it again. But nothing. Eventually, I crawled back under the tarp, knife in hand, and waited for dawn. The next day, I hiked higher up the ridge to try and clear my head. At the top, I found something I didn't expect, stone mounds. 4 of them, about waist-high, shaped like graves, old, half-sunk into the dirt and moss. No markers, no sign of tools, just rough stones stacked by hand. That should have been enough to make me pack up, but it wasn't. Back at camp that evening, I felt off, like something was watching me again. I tried to shake it, cooked my meal, then sat by the fire with my back to the creek. But the longer I stayed still, the more I noticed it, the silence. And then the scream. It came from just beyond the firelight. High-pitched, ragged, not an animal, not a person, something in between. I leapt to my feet, flashlight already in hand, scanned the woods. Nothing. Then a shape moved at the edge of my vision, tall, maybe 7 feet, but hunched and moving strangely, like its joints didn't work the way they should. I shouted, "Hey, who's out there?" No answer, no movement, just silence again. I threw dirt on the fire, grabbed my pack, and climbed the ridge. No way I was spending another night down there. I hiked fast, cutting through the brush with my knife when I had to. I didn't stop until I reached a small, mossy outcrop where I could camp with a view of the trail back out. But the second night was worse. Around midnight I heard whispering, not in English, not in any language I recognized. It came from the trees just downhill. Dozens of voices all murmuring at once, overlapping in a low, choking rhythm, like wind through dying throats. I froze in my sleeping bag, the whispering growing louder and closer. Then it stopped, all at once, and something breathed in, right behind my head. I lunged out of the bag, flashlight sweeping behind me. Nothing, just rocks and shadows. But when I turned to look uphill toward where the trail should have been, there it was, something tall and pale, crouched in the middle of the trail. Its skin was stretched thin over sharp bones. Its head was too narrow, with two sunken black holes where its eyes should have been, and it was just watching me. I stepped back. It didn't move. Then it tilted its head and whispered my name. I ran. No gear. No pack, no flashlight. I don't remember getting back to the truck. I don't remember the drive. I just remember the look on the gas station clerk's face when I stumbled in barefoot, shaking, covered in scrapes, asking to use the phone. He said I looked like I'd seen the devil. I think maybe I did. It's been 6 months. I haven't gone back. Haven't told anyone except for this. But sometimes at night, when it gets really still, I hear whispering again. And sometimes I wake up to footprints on my porch. Bare, long-toed, and still wet with creek water. I never used to be afraid of silence. In fact, I craved it. I worked as a wildlife surveyor for the better part of a decade, moving from state to state, spending weeks at a time deep in the backcountry logging animal sightings, migration patterns, and any signs of disease in the herds. Solitude was part of the job. For most of my life it was welcome, but that was before Montana. Before the Bitterroot Range, before the week that shattered something in me. I had been sent out in early February, tasked with tracking elk and moose populations in a remote stretch of wilderness near the Idaho border. My agency provided me with a snowmobile satellite beacon and enough rations for 10 days. The cabin I was staying in was a small research outpost, no power, no signal, just 4 walls and a tin roof already half buried in snow. It was isolated, rough, absolutely stunning. On day 1, I unpacked, logged the GPS coordinates, and went out for a basic sweep. Snow was knee-deep in most places, with drifts up to my waist. The temperature never climbed above 10 degrees. It was beautiful, but brutal, the kind of cold that feels alive pressing in on you from all sides. The first few days were uneventful, tracks here and there, a few distant glimpses of elk herds through the binoculars. Standard stuff. I'd return each night to the cabin, boil some snow for water, eat from a thermal pouch, and try to get some sleep. But by night 4, things changed. That evening, I was logging my notes by headlamp when I heard a knock. Not a knock from inside, a knock on the cabin door. At first, I thought maybe it was a branch shifting under snow, but it came again, A deliberate, single knock. Then silence. No one was supposed to be out here. The nearest ranger station was a 2-hour snowmobile ride away. I grabbed the flare gun from the wall and slowly approached the door. "Hello?" I called out. My voice cracked. Nothing. I opened the door. Snow drifted in, but there was no one there. No tracks. Just open white. That's when I noticed it, a handprint. Right in the middle of the window, pressed into the frost from the outside. It was massive, long-fingered, no gloves. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I found something worse. About 30 yards from the cabin, I saw a strange depression in the snow. Not a footprint, but something circular, wide, deep. Like a single knee had dropped into the snow, over and over again. A dragging line followed it, leading off into the woods. I followed it for about 100 feet, but something about the pattern. It didn't make sense. Whatever made it was moving with an awkward rhythm, stopping every few feet to press into the snow again, like it was crawling. By sunset, the wind had picked up. Snow started falling. I hunkered down, told myself I'd imagined the knocking, or the print was just some collapsed drift. But just after midnight, I heard it again. Knock, knock. Two this time, slower, heavier. I lay still, barely breathing. Then came the dragging sound, outside the cabin walls. Something scraping along the edge of the building. Then it started whispering. I couldn't make out the words, just a low, breathy voice circling the cabin. Over and over again. Scrape, whisper, knock. When it finally stopped, the silence felt even worse. It was total, as if the world itself had gone still. The next morning I found more prints. Not foot shape, just impressions like someone was kneeling in the snow, dragging themselves slowly in circles around the cabin. I followed them again out, past the tree line. That's when I saw the tree. It had something hanging from it. At first, I thought it was an old canvas pack, but as I got closer, I realized it was fur. Elk hide, maybe, sewn crudely into the shape of a cloak, hanging by sinew from a branch 10 feet off the ground. The snow beneath it was stained red. There were no animal remains nearby, no carcass, just the cloak swaying in the wind. I went back to the cabin and locked the door with shaking hands. That night, the whispering came back, but this time it was inside. It started faint from the rafters above my cot, then from the corners of the room, then right beside me. I snapped on my headlamp, no one there, but I saw something. A face in the window, sunken, pale, eyes like frozen marbles. It was watching me from outside, its breath fogging the glass, its mouth moving in silent words I couldn't hear. I fired the flare gun straight through the window. The light exploded across the snow, but the figure was already gone. I didn't sleep after that. I packed at dawn and rode the snowmobile back toward the trailhead, full throttle, not stopping for anything. The air was frigid, the wind cutting through my layers, but I didn't care. About halfway back, I saw it again, standing between two trees. That same figure, 7 feet tall, wrapped in fur and bone, its face pale and tight, like it had been dead for years. It didn't move, just watched me ride past. I made it back to the ranger station by noon. I didn't say much, just that something had spooked me out in the woods. They laughed, called me city soft, but I saw the way the old ranger looked at me when I described the whispering. The prints, the face in the glass, he didn't laugh. "You stayed in Black Hollow," he said quietly, "didn't you? That's what they call it. Black Hollow, old Cree land. Said something was left out there a long time ago. Something that walks like a man but isn't. Something that wears the dead like clothes and whispers with the voices of the people it's taken. I haven't gone back. I left wildlife work altogether after that winter." It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I decided to take a solitary hike through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. The trail was one I'd traversed many times before, winding through towering evergreens and alongside babbling brooks. The serenity of the woods had always been a balm to my restless spirit. As the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows through the trees, I stumbled upon a path I'd never noticed before. It was narrow and overgrown, almost hidden beneath a blanket of fallen leaves. Curiosity piqued, I decided to follow it, drawn by an inexplicable urge. The path led me deeper into the forest, the canopy above thickening and dimming the remaining daylight. The usual sounds of the woods, the chirping of birds, the rustling of small creatures had faded, replaced by an eerie silence. After what felt like an hour, I emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its wooden structure weathered and worn by time. Vines crept up its sides, and the windows were grimy, obscuring any view of the interior. A sense of unease settled over me, but my innate curiosity pushed me forward. I approached the cabin, each step accompanied by the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Reaching the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness within. I hesitated, then gently pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Faint light filtered through the grimy windows, casting murky beams across the room. The cabin appeared abandoned. Furniture lay in disarray, and cobwebs adorned the corners. As I ventured further in, I noticed a series of photographs scattered across a table. Picking one up, I saw it was a black and white image of a family, a man, woman, and 2 children standing in front of the very cabin I was in. Turning over more photos, I noticed something unsettling. In each successive picture, the family appeared more haggard, their expressions shifting from joy to despair. The final photo sent a chill down my spine. The family was absent, and in their place stood a tall, shadowy figure with hollow eyes. A sudden noise from the back room snapped me from my thoughts, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffling. My heart pounded as I debated whether to investigate or flee. Summoning courage, I moved toward the source of the sound. The door to the back room was closed. I placed my hand on the knob, feeling the cold metal beneath my palm. Taking a deep breath, I turned it and pushed the door open. The room was empty, save for a large, ornate mirror standing against the far wall. Its surface was pristine, contrasting sharply with the decay around it. Drawn to it, I stepped closer, my reflection becoming clearer with each step. As I stood before the mirror, an overwhelming sense of dread enveloped me. My reflection began to distort, the features twisting and contorting into a grotesque visage. Paralyzed, I watched as the reflection reached out, its hand emerging from the glass, fingers curling toward me. Breaking free from my stupor, I stumbled backward, crashing into a chair and sending it toppling. The noise seemed to shatter the illusion. When I looked back at the mirror, it reflected only the empty room. Not waiting to uncover more, I turned and fled the cabin, the door slamming shut behind me. I sprinted back through the woods, not daring to look back until I reached the familiar main trail. To this day, I can't explain what I experienced in that cabin. The photographs, the mirror, the oppressive sense of dread, all remain etched in my memory. I've since avoided that hidden path, leaving whatever secrets the cabin holds undisturbed. I wasn't planning to camp. I was just going for a long, lonely hike to clear my head, nothing more. It was mid-October in the Allegheny National Forest, and I figured the crisp air and fading foliage would help me reset. I'd been dealing with some heavy personal stuff, family things, and I needed to disappear for a bit. I packed light, just enough food for a day, a knife, a flashlight, a water filter, and my old military poncho in case the weather turned. I left my car at a gravel pull-off near the Timberline Trail and set off around noon. The forest was quiet, calm, peaceful, in that eerie way only the deep woods can be. It smelled like wet leaves and pine, and the trail was nearly empty. I passed one other person, a man with a massive backpack and headphones, before losing sight of any other humans entirely. I walked for hours. By the time I realized the sun was going down, I was already deep in the backcountry. I'd lost the trail somewhere around mile 6, but I wasn't worried. I had my GPS, a basic map, and more than enough time to hike back in the morning. I found a flat patch of land near a hollow with a half-dried creek bed and decided to bed down there for the night. No tent, just a poncho stretched over a stick and some rocks to make a crude lean-to. I started a small fire, ate a protein bar, and lay back with my pack as a pillow, watching the stars slide into view. Around 10 p.m., the forest went silent. It didn't taper off. It just stopped. The wind, the insects, the rustle of distant critters, gone. I've done a lot of solo hikes, and I've experienced plenty of weird silences, but this one felt wrong, heavy, like something was holding its breath. Then I heard the first voice. It was faint, coming from the tree line about 20 yards to my right. At first, I thought maybe a hiker had wandered off trail, but the words were too soft, garbled. "Help, please, I'm cold." It was a woman's voice, high-pitched, but the tone was all wrong, flat, like someone trying to sound panicked and not pulling it off. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and shined it in the direction of the voice. Nothing. Just trees. "Who's there?" I called. "Are you hurt?" The forest stayed silent. I stood, knife in hand, and scanned the trees. I didn't want to walk into the woods blindly, but if someone was hurt, I couldn't just ignore them either. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Help. I need help. Only now it wasn't the same voice. It was mine. It was my voice. Exact cadence. Exact inflection. The sound of me yelling from the woods. Please help me, it said again, this time louder. I turned off the flashlight. Heart pounding. Something was wrong. Horribly wrong. Then the voice changed again. Ben, it said, that's my name. Ben, come here. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Not even my sister, who I usually text when I go off-grid. I just needed to be alone. And whatever was out there knew my name and sounded exactly like me. I backed slowly toward the fire, keeping my eyes on the woods. I crouched, grabbing a few thick sticks and feeding the flames. The fire was small, just meant for warmth and comfort, but I didn't want to be without it now. Then the thing stepped into view. It didn't make a sound. No rustling leaves, no snapping branches. It just appeared between two trees, tall and thin, and almost human, but not quite. Its proportions were off, joints bending wrong. Its skin was grayish, pulled tight over its bones, and its mouth stretched far too wide for its narrow face. But it was the eyes that got me, and they were mine. Same shape, same color, same flicker of cautious fear I had when I looked at my own reflection. It tilted its head and spoke again. Ben, it said, perfect mimicry of my voice. It's safe out here. I backed toward the creek bed. I had no plan, just get distance. Get away. But then it started moving. Not walking, gliding. Its legs moved, yes, but it didn't seem to touch the ground. I threw a burning stick at it. It hissed, actually hissed, and vanished behind the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire roaring until dawn, and every few minutes I heard it circling. Sometimes it would whisper my name. Sometimes it would mimic the voice of my sister. Sometimes it would cry like a child. It never showed itself again, but I could feel it out there. Watching, waiting. At first light, I packed my gear, doused the fire, and started hiking back. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I didn't even rest. Just walked. I made it back to my car by mid-afternoon. I didn't look back. That was 4 years ago. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. And every now and then, late at night, I'll hear something outside my house. Just a whisper. Just for a second. Ben, Ben, come here. It's safe now. I keep the lights on after that. I don't think it ever really left. And worst of all, I think it learned how to follow me. My name is Darren Hodge. I'm 41 years old, a wildlife biologist by training, a father of one, and for a brief and unforgettable stretch in October of 2021, A man who looked into something I was never supposed to see. I've told myself it was a fever dream, a breakdown, stress. But I know the truth. And the truth is buried in the hollow beneath Elk Hill, in a stretch of forest that doesn't show up on any official map. The locals call it Devil's Hollow, and that name doesn't come from nothing. I'd taken a seasonal contract with the state wildlife tracking, migration patterns, some conservation survey work. I was alone except for the occasional call-ins with my supervisor, and I didn't mind. My wife had just filed for divorce. Our daughter was caught in the middle. I needed space, silence, nature. The posting was near Teodatin State Forest, deep in the heart of Pennsylvania, the kind of place where your cell signal vanishes before you've even finished parking. I set up in a rented cabin, stocked up on food, brought my work laptop, my trank gear, my field notes. I also brought the memories I couldn't seem to bury, the last fight with my wife, my daughter crying in the other room, the way I'd said things I didn't mean, things I can't take back. The first week was uneventful. One tracked some elk, recorded some nesting patterns, and even came across an old stone wall running through the forest like a forgotten scar. But things shifted on the 9th day. I was off the trail near Elk Hill, climbing a ridgeline I hadn't planned to explore. I was looking for a tagged black bear that had gone offline. Instead, I found a hollow. Not a valley, not a ravine. A hollow. It's hard to describe. It was like the trees bent away from it, their trunks twisted, leaning back as if afraid to grow too close. There was no wind, no bird calls, no crunch of leaves. Just stillness. I should have walked away. I should have logged the coordinates and told the next guy to handle it. But something about the silence drew me in. I crossed into the hollow just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The light turned copper. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. I stepped over a gnarled root and felt the air go cold. Not chilly cold, like walking into a freezer. My breath fogged. Then I saw it, a stone altar half sunken in the soil, carved with markings I didn't recognize, circles within circles. A vertical line piercing through a crude depiction of an open mouth, and next to it, nailed to the base of a tree, was a wooden placard, blackened, rotting, but one word was still legible. Listen. I thought it was some old hermit shrine or maybe a weird art project. I was about to snap a photo when I heard the whisper. At first I thought it was wind. Then it became clearer, closer, a voice, whispering my name. Darren? I turned, nothing. My radio crackled to life, even though I hadn't used it in hours. It played static, then a phrase my daughter had said to me just before I left.
I don't want you to go, Daddy.
My blood turned to ice. I mean, the trees bent inward as though exhaling, and the leaves fluttered despite the dead air. I backed up, tripped, fell. When I scrambled up again, the stone altar was gone. Just dirt where it had been. The placard was gone, too. I ran. When I got back to the cabin, I locked every door, turned on every light. I checked the radio battery full, signal strong. I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of light and memory. I drank until I passed out. That night I dreamed of my daughter's face drawn, eyes hollow, her mouth stitched shut with black thread. I woke at 3:33 a.m. sharp. The cabin was freezing. My breath hung in the air, and on the wooden floor right beneath the front door was a feather. Long, black, wet. Not from any bird I've ever studied. I burned it in the fireplace. The next day I called my supervisor, told him I needed to cut the contract short, family emergency. He sounded disappointed but didn't argue. I was supposed to leave the following morning. That night I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, deliberate. I peered through the window, flashlight off. A figure stood just beyond the glow of the porch light. Tall, thin, wearing a parka too clean for these woods. His face pale but smiling. Too much. I didn't open the door. He didn't knock. He just said softly, "You heard it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I just stepped back, heart pounding. "I can take it from you," he said, "the pain, the guilt. I can hollow it out. That's what the hollow is for." I slammed the blinds closed. When I opened them again moments later, he was gone. I didn't sleep. I left at first light. But I never made it more than 10 miles. The road curved into a stretch of forest I didn't recognize. The map said I was heading west. The compass agreed. But the signs, they were wrong. Everyone read Elk Hill, 2 miles, no matter how far I drove. I turned back, took a different route. Same signs. By nightfall, I was back at the cabin. But it wasn't the same. The windows were all shattered. The interior was blackened with soot. The air smelled like burnt pine and old blood. On the wall, scratched into the plaster, was a phrase in looping, uneven letters. "Listen, he waits." That night I sat on the porch with my shotgun, watching the woods. The man returned. Same smile. Same voice. "You're already part of it, Darren. You stepped into the hollow. It remembers you now." I raised the shotgun. "Back off." He met my daughter, the look she gave me before I left. "Nothing," I said, my voice cracking. "Not a goddamn thing." He smiled wider. "Good, then I'll take everything else." He vanished again. It's been a year. I got out eventually. The forest let me go after 3 days of wandering in circles. After I burned the feather and smashed the placard and screamed my daughter's name until my throat bled. I woke up in a ditch outside a state road. A ranger found me. I've tried to resume my life. I go to work. I see my daughter on weekends. I pretend I'm okay. But I keep hearing things. My name in static, my daughter crying when she's asleep. The wind whispering listen. And every now and then I find a black feather on my windshield. Sometimes I wake at 3:33 a.m. with dirt under my fingernails and the taste of pine needles in my mouth. The hollow remembers, so I'm telling you this now. If you ever hike near Elk Hill and you feel the trees bend inward, or you come across a stone altar you weren't meant to find, don't listen. Because once you do, you can never forget. My name's Calvin Brooks. I used to be a seasonal firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service. This happened in 2019 during a quiet stretch in early autumn. when the wildfires were low and the sky stayed mercifully clear. I was stationed in a small lookout cabin near Deep Run Valley, a remote pocket of forest tucked away in the Allegheny Plateau, Pennsylvania. It was supposed to be a break, just 2 weeks alone, cataloging tree health, watching for smoke plumes, checking the seismic sensors that dotted the hills for signs of underground shifts. I'd done it before. I liked the quiet. I needed it after what happened to my friend Marcus that summer. He died in a controlled burn that turned uncontrolled real fast. I was supposed to be with him that day, but I'd swapped shifts. Guilt's a funny thing. It doesn't scream. It just sits behind your ribs like a stone you can't pass. So when they offered the Deep Run assignment, I took it without hesitation. The cabin was 20 miles from the nearest ranger station. So when they offered the Deep Run assignment, I took it without hesitation. The cabin was 20 miles from the nearest ranger station. There's something about that forest. It hums. Not like wind or bugs. I mean it hums. Deep, almost below your hearing. Like the woods are alive and they're thinking. Watching. The first few nights were peaceful. I set up my gear, did the rounds, made some notes about a few fallen trees from a recent storm. I cooked beans over the stove, read old mystery novels, and tried not to think about Marcus. Then, on the 4th night, I saw the lantern. It was a dim yellow glow, maybe a mile down the ridge, floating just off the trail. At first, I thought it was another ranger. Maybe someone had gotten turned around. I grabbed my binoculars and peered through them, expecting to see a figure. I didn't see anyone, just that faint, swaying light, like a flame in a glass case. But it moved too smoothly, too silently, bobbing through trees, without casting real shadows. I radioed base. Nothing but static. I called on the landline. It was dead. I watched the lantern until it disappeared behind a hill. The next morning, I hiked down the trail to check it out. I found no footprints, no tire marks, no broken branches, nothing. But I did find a strange symbol carved into a pine trunk. It looked like a man with antlers and long arms stretched wide, holding a lantern in one hand. The bark around it had blackened, like it had been burned into the tree. I tried to report it when I got back to the cabin. The phone worked again, the radio too. I left a message with base, but they didn't seem concerned. Probably an old hiker's carving, they said. Maybe someone having fun with Halloween early. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the symbol, and then, just after midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. I sat bolt upright in my cot. No engine sounds, no crunch of tires, just slow, heavy footsteps on dry wood. I grabbed the shotgun they kept locked under the bed and stepped to the door, heart pounding. "Who's out there?" I called. No response. Just silence. Then something knocked. Not on the door, but the window 3 taps, measured, precise. I aimed the gun. I couldn't see a face, but I saw a glow of faint yellow light, like a lantern swaying just out of view. I didn't open the door. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I found boot prints in the frost outside. Long, narrow, spaced too far apart to be normal. And etched into the dirt beside the stairs was that same figure the lantern man scratched in with a stick or fingernail. I packed my gear, called base, told them I was leaving early, but the road wasn't there. I'm serious. I followed the same rut I'd driven in 4 days earlier, but after a mile, the trail just stopped. Trees I didn't remember blocked the path. The air was thick, humid, like July instead of October. Birds weren't singing anymore. It was like the forest had swallowed the road whole. I tried my GPS. It wouldn't lock, just spun in place. My compass pointed east, then south, then back to east. So I returned to the cabin. I tried not to panic. That night I heard the voice. It came from the tree line, low, raspy, and too calm. Trade the flame, it said. Your guilt for peace. I didn't answer. I stayed hidden behind the door, gun across my lap. The next morning, there were more symbols, carved into the trees surrounding the cabin, all pointing inward. And hanging from the branches were bones, small, animal, maybe, but tied with red string like charms. I considered running into the woods, but I knew better. That place was shifting. It wanted me to leave the path, to chase that lantern. That night, the knocking came again. 3 taps on the window, then 3 on the back wall, then 3 more on the roof. I whispered to myself, this isn't real. But the door handle turned. Slowly, I raised the gun, but it stopped just shy of clicking open. Then the voice returned, your fire burns you. Let me take it. It knew about Marcus, about what I saw in the flames, the scream that plays in my head when I try to sleep, the smell of his suit melting. I screamed back, you can't have it. The forest responded. The wind howled. The lantern appeared again, this time closer, at the edge of the yard. I aimed the shotgun and fired. The flame vanished, but I heard laughter, dry, hollow, and then silence again. I tried to leave at first light, packed everything, ran through the trees. I didn't follow the roads. I just went straight, compass be damned. I hiked until my legs gave out. I collapsed in a clearing full of old stone pillars, moss-covered, broken, arranged in a ring. In the center stood a man, tall, thin, wearing a long coat. He held a lantern. Its glow wasn't yellow now. It was blue. He raised it, and I felt something inside me, like a pressure behind my eyes. My lungs froze. My vision blurred. I dropped to my knees. He stepped closer. You carry it, he said, so heavy, so loud. The flame inside the lantern flared, and I saw it Marcus, his face screaming inside the flame, trapped, twisting. No, I whispered. The man nodded, as if he pitied me. Trade it. I reached forward, then something in me snapped. I don't know what. Maybe it was instinct, maybe something deeper, but I pulled my knife, slashed at the air between us. The flame burst. The man vanished, and I woke up in a ranger station, a day later, dehydrated, raving. They found me collapsed near the road. No one had heard from me in 3 days. They asked what happened. I told them a tree fell on the cabin. They bought it. I didn't go back. I still have the carvings on my boots. The blackened pines scratch across my jacket. I keep them in a box under my bed like cursed relics. Sometimes, late at night, I hear 3 knocks on the window. Always 3. Sometimes I dream of fire. Sometimes I smell melted gear. And always, I see that lantern. still swaying in the dark. My name is Alex Merritt. I'm 36. This happened in October of 2020, during what I thought would be a simple weekend retreat to get my head on straight. I work in audio engineering, music, post-production, podcasts, you name it. I hear things people miss. I notice frequencies that others tune out. It's not a superpower. It just means I can't unhear things once I've heard them. It started after my mother died. Sudden stroke. I'd just finished mixing a documentary score when I got the call. I didn't cry, not immediately, but I stopped sleeping. I'd sit up at night obsessing over audio files, filtering white noise, listening for things that weren't there. That's when I heard it. It began as a low hum, almost a background resonance tucked beneath silence. Not in my apartment, not in any real room, but in the gaps between recordings. Like a breath drawn between words, like something was waiting to speak. I needed out, I needed distance, so I booked a cabin through an off-grid rental site. Small, solar-powered place outside a town called Quiet Creek, nestled between state forest, land, and hills. No one seemed eager to hike. No phone service, no neighbors, no music. Just my field recorder, some audio gear, and a week's worth of freeze-dried food. Perfect. The cabin itself was beautiful in that rustic, nobody has bled here yet kind of way. A single room, wood stove, small porch. Forest in every direction. The wind made the trees creak like old swings. At night it got so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat echo in my ears. I set up my gear to record ambient tracks wind through pine, distant crows, footsteps over dry leaves. But no matter where I pointed the mic, that same low-frequency hum kept returning. Not on sight, not audible to the naked ear, but always embedded in the file on playback. I ran a spectral analysis on my laptop. The hum wasn't just persistent, it shifted. Frequencies that should have been static moved, like it was speaking in tones we weren't meant to understand. Then, on the third night, I heard my mother's voice. Not in a dream, not in memory. On the playback of a 2 a.m. field recording I'd taken near the base of the ridge. Just a whisper tucked behind the wind. "Alex, it's not quiet here." I froze. I replayed the file. The voice repeated. Same cadence. Same impossible tone. Her voice unmistakably. Except she'd been dead for 3 weeks. Cremated. I didn't sleep. I sat by the stove, headphones clamped over my ears, replaying every file I'd captured since I arrived. More whispers, fragmented at first. A man's voice unfamiliar. A child, giggling behind the crackle of the fire. Names spoken too close to the mic. My name, over and over, Alex, Alex, Alex. The recorder had a built-in time stop. One of the files had recorded while I was asleep. I never left it running overnight. Yet there it was, 8 minutes and 43 seconds of whispers, dragging footsteps. A door creaking open and shut. I checked the recorder's location log. It said the file was recorded inside the cabin. That night, I boarded the door. I set up my laptop with motion-triggered recording software, aimed it at the porch. I left a mic inside, running into the dew, looped to autosave every 10 minutes. At 3:03 a.m., I woke to the faint sound of shuffling wood like someone dragging something across the porch. I didn't move. Then came the knock, one knock. Then two. Then, after a long pause, the third. I crept to the window, heart in my throat. Nothing was there. Just mist rolling in low over the ferns. I checked the camera. The recording had glitched, skipped 17 seconds. I replayed the audio from the indoor mic. Behind the knocks, I heard a voice. Too loud. Sighed softly, sadly. The next day, I found a symbol scratched into the cabin's back door. A looping spiral intersected by a vertical line. I hadn't noticed it before. I ran a high-pass filter over a wind recording from that morning. Hidden in the white noise was a faint breath, followed by a voice I didn't recognize. You heard it. That means it hears you. By now I was unraveling. I packed my gear, threw it in the car, and drove. Except the road didn't end where it should have. After 20 minutes I pulled over. I was back at the cabin. Not metaphorically, literally. The same cracked stone, same hanging lantern on the porch. I'd driven in a perfect loop without turning once. I screamed. I don't remember stopping. I only know I woke up slumped in the car seat, windshield fogged, headlights dim. The sun hadn't moved. My watch still said 3:03 a.m. I got out. The world was silent. Not quiet. Silent. No birds, no wind. Not even the crunch of my boots over the gravel registered. I lifted my recorder. Hit record. Counted to 10. Stopped it. Played it back. Silence. Then a voice. Your mother came through first. You called her. I dropped the recorder. That night, I tried burning the laptop. The flames licked the casing, warped the screen, melted the plastic. I thought it worked until I turned around and saw the laptop sitting neatly back on the table. Screen on, open. A file was playing. My voice, whispering, it's already inside. I don't remember anything else from that night. I woke up on the porch. No signs of fire, no laptop damage. But inside, the furniture had moved. The table was now against the far wall. My sleeping bag was pinned beneath the stove. And on the ceiling, scratched into the beams, was a sentence in long, looping script. When you hear yourself, run. I didn't sleep the rest of the week. I tried to hike out trail after trail, road after road. Every path looped. Eventually, I found myself standing at the base of the ridge where I'd made that first recording, where I'd first heard my mother. A man was waiting for me. He wore a black jacket, carried a lantern old, rusted. Its glow was a dull blue. His face was pale, eyes too reflective. Trade it, he said. Trade what? I whispered. The sound. The one only you can hear. I'll take it. In exchange? He looked past me. At someone else.
No. He smiled gently. You will, sooner or later. Once it takes your voice, you'll want it gone. Then he vanished. Just blinked out.
I ran. Eventually, after what felt like a month, I found the road again. This time it led out. I never went back. Now I sleep in motels. never the same one twice. I scrub audio for work, but only with headphones off one ear. I don't record my own voice. I don't speak after midnight. I keep my laptop in a locked case. And I never ever listen to the silence, because some nights when it's quiet enough, I hear myself whispering from the other room, and my voice says, "You already traded it." My name is Chris Ellery. I'm 35 years old, and until a few months ago, I worked for a conservation nonprofit that tracked freshwater ecosystems throughout the Northeast. Mostly environmental data, water pH, wildlife populations, invasive algae blooms. It was nerdy work, sure, but I liked it. I liked patterns. I liked balance. What I saw in Stillwater Gorge broke that for me. I don't talk about it. Not to my coworkers. Not to my family. Only to you now, because I think it's still following me. And I need someone to know what's out there before it finds a way in again. This happened in May of 2021. I was sent to log baseline water quality measurements in a series of tributaries outside Stillwater Gorge, Pennsylvania. Not many people go there. The land's public, but unmaintained, half forgotten by the state. The gorge itself was carved by glacial runoff and sits surrounded by old pine, steep walls, and miles of undergrowth that eats trails faster than hikers can stamp them down. They told me it would be a 3-day survey, easy terrain, solo trip, primitive camping, they said. Just a kind way of saying don't expect cell service or marked roads. It wasn't essential, but my mom used to tell me, if you ever get lost, look at your own face. You'll see if you're still in there. God, if only I'd known. I entered the gorge near a collapsed ranger station. Nothing but a stone chimney and a half-buried welcome sign. From there the trail descended fast. The canopy was thick enough to turn noon into a twilight. The air smelled green wet moss, old bark, something sour beneath it. The water below was pitch black and still, not a ripple, not even from bugs. I remember thinking Stillwater, named for a reason. The first day passed uneventfully. I made camp in a shallow ravine, set up my gear, collected samples. Nothing weird, but that night something woke me. Not a noise exactly, a shift. Like the air pressure dropped suddenly, and every tree held its breath. I sat up, heart racing. That's when I saw the reflection, not in the creek, in my mirror. It was standing outside my tent. A figure tall, hunched, watching, wearing what looked like my jacket. But its face was mine, only wrong. Longer, stretched. The eyes glinted too brightly, too wet. I spun around with my flashlight. Nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning came, I packed fast. I told myself it was stress, that maybe I dreamed it. Then I checked the water samples. They were all corrupted pH readings spiked, the temperature inconsistent. Every single one of them showed signs of decomposition, as if the water had come from a swamp or a body drain, not a pristine forest creek. Worse, one of the vials had something floating inside it. Something I didn't remember collecting. a strand of black hair. That second day, I hiked deeper toward the center of the gorge to log backup readings. I was maybe 3 miles in when I found it. A pool, perfectly circular, maybe 40 feet across, set into a natural basin surrounded by twisted pines. No wind, no sound. The surface of the pool reflected perfectly too perfectly. No shimmer, no distortion. I tossed a pebble in. The ripples were long concentric rings that moved outward, then snapped back into stillness within seconds. I leaned over. My reflection looked back up at me. Then it smiled. I didn't. I stepped back so fast I nearly fell in. My stomach flipped. Behind me I heard my own voice say, "Careful, you're already falling." I whipped around. No one. I ran, just flat out sprinted until my legs burned. I didn't stop until I was back at the camp. My tent was missing, just gone. The clearing was empty except for the mirror I'd brought, now standing alone on its tripod in the exact spot I'd set it. I approached, slowly. In the mirror I saw myself standing there, panting. But my reflection blinked late like a frame out of sync. It smiled. I didn't. Then it opened its mouth and whispered, "You should have traded when it asked." That night I tried to sleep under the stars. No tent, just wrapped in my coat, knife clutched in one hand. At 2:37 a.m., I heard water dripping. Even though there was no rain, even though the trees were dry, I looked up. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing. My height, my face, barefoot, soaking wet, steam rising from its skin in the moonlight. It raised one hand and waved. I didn't move. I didn't sleep. By morning, it was gone. But my mirror now had a crack across it. I tried to hike out that day. Every trail led me back to the pool. I stopped counting after the 4th loop. I tried walking in the opposite direction. Didn't help. Eventually, I found a clearing I didn't remember. A stone circle lay embedded in the soil-flat rocks, like stepping stones, spiraling inward. At the center sat a small wooden box. I didn't want to open it. But I did. Inside was a second mirror, round, polished. When I picked it up, the surface shimmered, not with my reflection, but a place, a room, my bedroom, as it looked back home. A still image, frozen at 3:33 a.m. Then my own voice came from the mirror. You could go back. I dropped it. It cracked, but didn't shatter. Then I saw the water behind me, the reflection pool. A figure stood on the surface, not in it, on it, feet resting atop the still water. It wore my face, my eyes, but behind its smile was something ancient and vast, like the void had learned how to mimic love. It spoke. Trade the echo, one you love, one memory, one truth, I'll take it. I shook my head. It only smiled wider. You already did, you just haven't accepted it yet. I turned and ran. Eventually I blacked out, maybe from fear, maybe from exposure. I woke up in my car, parked at the ranger station, the one that had been a chimney before. The stone walls were intact, the windows dusty but unbroken. My tent was packed in the trunk. My phone was full of photos, ones I didn't take, shots of me sleeping, close-up selfies with my own terrified face twisted in dreams, photos of my reflection smiling at the lens, and audio files, Ones I didn't record, each only a few seconds long. Every single one says the same thing in my voice. You were never supposed to hear this. I haven't gone back, but every mirror I've owned since then cracks, sometimes overnight, sometimes while I'm looking into it. I've caught glimpses of myself smiling when I wasn't, sometimes mouthing words I can't hear, sometimes waving, and when I sleep, I dream of the pool, still, waiting. My name is Michael Redd. I'm 35. What I'm about to share happened in November of 2020, right in the middle of the second wave. I hadn't spoken to anyone in person in nearly 3 weeks. That isolation had started to feel like a constant hum in my bones' background static. So when my sister Natalie called and said she couldn't stop dreaming about the tower, I listened. I keep seeing it, she whispered, over and over. A metal tower in the woods, always the same one. She said she'd seen it in her dreams since childhood, but never thought much of it. But now it was constant. The dreams were longer, more detailed. She even drew the tower from memory and sent me a picture. It looked almost real. A fire lookout tower, rusted, with a spiral stair and a locked door at the top. Dead trees surrounded it like sentries. I showed the drawing to a friend of mine, a park volunteer named Henry, who'd worked with the state for years. He told me there was a tower like that in Bald Eagle State Forest, north central Pennsylvania. It had been decommissioned back in the 80s, and access was restricted now because of safety issues. That got my attention. Natalie had never been to Bald Eagle. She lived in Oregon. She'd never even been east of the Mississippi, so how could she dream of something so specific? That's when she said it. I think something's calling me there. I made the trip alone. I didn't tell Natalie. I told myself I'd hike to the tower, take some pictures, prove to her it wasn't anything special, just rust and metal. Maybe then she'd stop obsessing. I drove from Pittsburgh with 2 nights' worth of gear. Weather was colder than expected, dull gray skies, occasional sleet. I parked off a fire road and hiked 6 miles into the forest using a paper map and a compass, since cell signal was non-existent out there. When I reached the tower, my breath caught in my throat. It looked exactly like Natalie's drawing. Not similar, not close, exact. The fire tower stood in a clearing surrounded by half-dead pines. Rust flaked off the stairwell. Every step creaked under my weight. The wind up top was razor-sharp. The trapdoor leading into the tower's top room was padlocked, but I wasn't planning on breaking in. I took some photos. The moment I did, my camera app froze. I mean locked. The screen went white, and the phone shut itself down even though the battery had been at 83%. I tried to restart it. Nothing. I gave up. I'd come to prove the place existed. That was enough. But when I turned around, the trail I'd come up was gone. I don't mean I couldn't remember where it was. I mean it was gone. There was no broken branch I'd stepped over, no muddy trail, just dense trees. I walked in what I knew was the right direction, but after 20 minutes I found myself back at the tower. I tried again, using the compass this time. Same thing. Back at the tower, panic started to crack through the edge of my calm. I set up camp right there in the clearing. I figured I'd wait until morning, climb the tower again, and maybe get a better vantage. That night, as I lay in my tent, I heard footsteps. Not animal, rustling footsteps, crunching on the frost-hardened leaves, slow and deliberate. Then a voice. Michael. My breath froze. It was my sister's voice. Michael, come up. I'm in the tower. My heart thudded so hard, I thought it would crack my ribs. Please, I don't want to be alone anymore. I didn't move, didn't respond. Eventually, the footsteps faded. The next morning, I opened the tent and found a drawing tacked to the outside flap with a branch. One of Natalie's. Pencil lines detailed the tower from a slightly different angle, and this time a small figure stood at the top, looking down. The figure had my face. I didn't know what to do. I sat by the base of the tower, staring up. Then I noticed the padlock was gone. Just gone. The trapdoor was slightly open. I should have left. I know I should have, but something about that tower, it was like a hook in my mind. I had to see the top. Had to know what was up there. I climbed the spiral stairs. Every step felt like a heartbeat. The wind moaned through the latticework, almost rhythmic. I reached the trapdoor, opened it, and stepped inside. It was wrong. The air was still, but it smelled like rain-soaked paper and burnt hair. The room had wooden floors warped with moisture. The windows were blacked out with soot. In the corner sat a single object. A tape recorder. It was one of those old dictaphone-style machines. I pressed play. A voice crackled to life. My voice. I can't leave. I've tried. I leave and I come back. I leave and I come back. I leave and I come back. I don't know what's real anymore. I see her sometimes, Natalie. She stands outside at night, watching, but I don't think it's her anymore. Static. Then the tape looped, started again. I backed away, heart in my throat. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs below, rhythmic, measured, coming up. I bolted out the trapdoor, climbing down 3 steps at a time. Halfway down, I saw myself coming up, wearing the same coat, same boots, same flashlight clipped to the pack strap. His eyes were different, too wide. The smile was wrong. Too many teeth. He whispered, found you. I leapt off the stairs. I landed hard on my ankle, felt something pop, but I didn't stop running. I ran for hours, and every time I stopped, I could still see the tower through the trees. Always right there. Eventually, I collapsed. I woke up inside the tower. I don't remember how. I don't remember going back, but I was sitting on the wooden floor next to the tape recorder. A new tape had been placed inside it. A fresh label read, Michael 2. I pressed play. My voice, again, but different. I know now. The tower doesn't keep you. You keep yourself. It lets you believe you're leaving. Shows you versions of yourself that almost made it out. But none of them did. There's no out. Click. Tape ends. I screamed. I destroyed the recorder. I kicked the trapdoor open and jumped down the stairs 2 at a time. This time I didn't stop running until I passed out. When I woke again, I was in a hospital in Lewisburg. A hiker had found me wandering on a road near Po Valley, disoriented, covered in scratches and frostbite. No gear, no pack, no ID, just a drawing folded in my coat pocket. The tower, and me. At the top, I asked about my phone. They hadn't found one. When I got home, Natalie was dead. She'd taken her life 2 nights earlier. In her studio, they found dozens of drawings of the tower. Hundreds. One of them had a figure at the top. A man standing, arms out, mouth wide, like he was screaming forever. On the back, she'd written, "He's still up there." Now every night at 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzes. Just once. No caller. No message. Just static. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the tower through trees that aren't supposed to be there. I hear footsteps and a voice just like mine. My name is Travis Rourke. I'm 38 now, but this happened back in the fall of 2021, when I was still working full-time for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. My role was pretty standard field technician, mostly working on trail surveys, tower inspections, wildlife tagging. I'm not supposed to talk about what happened, but I've been writing these entries down over time, trying to purge them from my system. I'm not crazy, but I don't sleep right, haven't in years. Not since the night I climbed the old fire tower off Bear Run Trail and saw what was really waiting in that stretch of gorge we called Black Hollow. I'll start from the beginning. The PGC owns a small network of decommissioned fire towers along the ridges outside Pine Creek Gorge. Most of them haven't been used in decades, just rusting metal relics barely standing, swallowed by trees. But once in a while we'd have to climb up, check the condition of the structure, log weather damage, make sure hikers hadn't vandalized anything. In late October, my supervisor sent me to check on Signal Tower 9. It was remote farther than I'd ever hiked solo, about 4 miles off the main forest road. The last person who logged maintenance on it was back in 2014. I remember because I read the incident report. It said the tech had fallen and broken his ankle, claimed he saw something on the ridge before radioing for help. They said he was probably delirious from pain. I should have taken that more seriously. The trail-in was quiet, too quiet. Not even squirrels in the brush. That time of year should have been full of motion turkey, deer, even the odd black bear preparing for winter. But it felt evacuated, like the forest knew something was coming. I reached the base of the tower just before dusk. The thing stood about 60 feet tall, wrapped in ivy and rust, but surprisingly intact. My job was to check the platform, make sure the bolts were still holding. No exposed rebar or loose joints. I climbed with a harness, but honestly didn't feel safe the whole time. The air up there had that wrong feeling, thin, but heavy. My breath came in short bursts. My skin tingled. It was already getting dark, which made no sense. I checked my watch, 5:13 p.m., but the horizon looked closer to midnight. I pulled out my phone. No service. Expected. I radioed in to dispatch, just routine protocol. The static response made me pause. Then it clicked. Through the interference, I heard a voice. "Stay, please stay." It wasn't dispatch. I thought maybe I caught a fragment of someone else's channel. Happens sometimes, but the voice didn't sound like it came through the speaker. It sounded like it was inside the radio, like it was crawling through the coils. Flickering pale yellow, swaying just out of reach. It moved between the pines, bobbing as if someone carried it slowly, deliberately. I called out. No answer. Then the radio buzzed again. "Stay with us." I shut it off. I should have hiked back then. I know that. But I told myself it was just a poacher or some hunter who didn't want to get caught. I told myself I'd wait until first light. So I set up camp about 50 yards from the tower. By the time night fully fell, I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The darkness was thick like the trees were pressing in. I lit a small fire, kept close to my tent, made some coffee, and tried to read a field guide just to keep my mind calm. But the fire wouldn't burn right. The flames danced sideways, low to the ground, almost blue at the tips. No warmth, just light. I kept hearing whispering behind me in the trees. But when I turned, there was nothing. The wind wasn't blowing. The air was dead still. Copper, wet fur, and something like rotting milk. I went to zip into the tent when I noticed my backpack was gone. Not misplaced gone, ripped away from where I'd leaned it. No sign of a drag path. No animals, nothing. I stood there, heart hammering, when I heard the sound again. The lantern, it was back, same spot, just beyond the clearing. Only this time I saw the shape holding it. A tall woman, pale as a corpse, long black hair dripping with moisture. She didn't walk, she glided, just above the ground. Her face was empty. I mean that literally. There were hollows where the eyes and mouth should have been. Just smooth, pale skin, and something inside moving just beneath it. Like breathing worms, she lifted the lantern, and behind her the trees shifted. A whole wall of fog poured from the ridge behind her, flooding into the clearing like a wave. I fell backward, clutching my sidearm, but the moment I raised it, the flame in the lantern flared blue, and everything froze. No wind, no fire, no breath, time just stopped. I blinked and she was gone. So was the fog, but the ground was soaked. The fire pit was full of red water. I passed out. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. The fire was dead. My tent was collapsed. My boots were soaked. My hands were shaking. My radio was hissing static again. Then it said something new. Only one may leave. I grabbed my gear, what little was left, and bolted. I didn't stop running until sunrise. When I finally reached my truck, it was crusted with pine needles. My clock was blinking 3:13. I didn't go back. When I filed the report, I left most of that out. I said I got disoriented, said I dropped my radio, claimed the fog messed with my bearings. Nobody questioned it. But a few weeks later, I got a letter at my home address. No return name, no stamp, just a folded page. In neat, tiny writing were 3 words, "She followed you," and taped to the bottom was a photograph. It showed the fire tower, and behind it, in the shadows, a figure holding a lantern. My name is Ryan Geller. I'm 34 years old, and I used to work as a wildlife ecologist for a conservation nonprofit based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Most of my job involved cataloging flora and fauna in rural state forests, checking for signs of invasive species, and assisting the occasional university research team. I'd spent years in the woods. I thought I understood them. I thought I respected them. Then I went to Tioga State Forest in October of 2022, and I learned how small I really was, how fragile. I'd been sent to follow up on a series of strange wildlife reports around a section of the forest near Bear Run Trail odd migration patterns, birds abandoning nests mid-season, that sort of thing. Our usual contact with the DCNR had taken a leave of absence, so I was on my own. I didn't mind. It wasn't my first solo trip. I loaded up my Subaru Outback and headed north, driving through the crisp, sun-drenched hills until the cell signal dropped away and the only sound was the engine humming beneath the chirping canopy. My plan was simple. 2 days out in the forest, take samples, document anomalies, and report back. Easy. I made camp at the edge of a remote tributary, not far from where a ranger station once stood before it burned down in the late 90s. The forest was beautiful. Fiery reds and burnt oranges painted the ridgeline, and the creek beside me babbled with gentle persistence. It all felt normal. But things changed on the second night. It started with sound, or more accurately, the absence of it. I was sitting near the fire scribbling notes when I realized the creek had gone silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, just a flick of flames and the sudden thudding of my heart. I stood, flashlight in hand, scanning the woods. Nothing. But when I turned back toward my tent, I saw something odd, thin wisps of fog creeping over the forest floor, curling through the brush like living fingers. I checked my watch. 8:32 p.m. I remember that clearly. I took a photo of the fog for the report, but when I checked the image, the screen glitched. Just static. That's when I heard the first voice. It sounded like a young girl, distant, calling my name. Ryan, come see. I froze. There was no way anyone else should have been out here. I hadn't seen another vehicle in 20 miles. I called back cautiously. No reply. Instead, I heard something worse, my own voice, echoing back from deeper in the trees, saying exactly what I just said. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the acoustics, maybe some wildlife mimicking. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The fire, now blue at the edges, crackled lower than it should have, casting shadows that didn't match the trees. I should have left then, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed the night, huddled in my tent, clutching the knife I kept for emergencies. I slept in patches. Each time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of fog seeping through the seams of my tent and something standing at the creek's edge, watching. At 3:13 a.m., I woke up cold. My phone buzzed with a notification, except there was no signal. The screen read, "She is near." Then it shut off, dead, battery gone. I stepped out into a thick wall of fog. My fire had gone out, leaving behind perfectly unburned logs, like it had never existed. My backpack was soaked. My compass spun lazily, as if unsure which direction even existed. I tried to hike out, but Tioga wasn't Tioga anymore. The trails had changed. The terrain looped on itself. After an hour of walking, I arrived back at my own campsite. Except this time, something had changed. There was a jar on the fire pit, glass, corked, and filled with red water. I didn't touch it, but I heard her again. That voice, closer now. "Ryan, come see." It sounded like my sister, the one who died 5 years ago in a car crash. She used to say that exact phrase when she found something neat in the woods behind our childhood home. I don't know how I escaped. I think I stopped trying to. At some point I passed out on the trail. A group of volunteer trail runners found me early the next morning, babbling incoherently, covered in bruises, and what they thought was dried blood, except the fluid on my shirt was faintly pink, almost metallic in smell. When I asked if they'd seen a jar near the creek, they looked at me like I was insane. They hadn't seen any fog either, not even a wisp. I told my boss I had a panic episode, blamed it on stress, took a month off, but things haven't gone back to normal. Clock's in my apartment stall at 3:13 a.m. My bathroom sink sometimes drips red, and last night I found a jar in my fridge. Same kind, corked. No one could have put it there. I left it on the porch and called in sick this morning, but now it's back inside. On my kitchen counter, and the condensation on the window says, "You came back. She sees you now." If you're reading this, if you're heading to Tioga, to Pine Creek, or anywhere near Bear Run Trail, please turn around. Don't ignore the fog. Don't listen to the voices. And for the love of whatever gods you believe in, don't touch the jar. My name is David Kirsch, and I used to work for the Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry. Most of my job involved trail inspections, fallen tree clearing, and checking signage. I loved it, being out in the woods alone, breathing in air so crisp it almost stung. I've hiked nearly every trail in the Pine Creek Gorge in Tioga State Forest. I know the area better than most maps do. That's why I can't explain what happened to me in May of 2019. That's why I haven't stepped into the forest since. It started with a simple assignment: hike a disused service trail near Cedar Run that had been reported as overgrown and possibly unsafe. The trail wasn't even on most modern maps anymore. Just an old side spur branching off from the Black Forest Trail, marked only by a small painted rock at its mouth. Locals used to call it Widow's Walk. No one knew why. I assumed it was named after some old homestead, or maybe a local ghost story that never made it online. The morning I set out, the weather was ideal. Sunny, low 60s, slight wind. I parked at a pull-off, double-checked my pack, topo map, GPS, satellite phone, basic first aid, knife, filtered water bottle, backup batteries. I don't mess around when I go solo. That trail was supposed to loop back into the main path after 5 or 6 miles. But here's the thing. I never found the loop, and I never found the way back. About an hour in, the main trail narrowed. Trees leaned in. Light dimmed beneath the hemlocks. The birdsong started to fade, and I remember thinking, this part of the forest feels too still. The trail sign I expected never came. Instead, I passed a crumbling stone marker, waist high, with a faint spiral carved into it. Not a blaze, not anything official. It looked ancient. I pulled out my GPS. Signal was bouncing. Coordinates jittered. I refreshed the app, nothing. Still, I kept going, assuming the trail would reconnect eventually. I noticed something odd about the trees ahead. They didn't move. No swaying, no shifting with the wind. The leaves didn't rustle. They were perfectly still, like a photograph. Then I noticed something even stranger when I looked back. The trail behind me looked different. It sloped uphill where I thought it had been flat. The light was wrong, too. Grayish, like the sun had dimmed behind something not quite clouds. I kept walking. After another mile or two, I found a rusted signpost hammered into a boulder. The lettering was all but eroded, but I could just barely make out one word beneath the corrosion. Hollow. No town or village I knew of. No mention in my route planning. I decided to turn back, but the moment I tried, my compass needle started spinning. Not fast, just a slow, lazy circle, like it was drunk. I laughed nervously, told myself it was magnetism in the rocks. I took a different route back, trying to trace my steps. I walked for an hour, 2. Then I came across the same boulder, the same sign, the exact same spot, and the stone marker was now cracked clean down the center. That's when I called in. The sat phone rang, then crackled, then dropped the call entirely. No signal. I turned it off and on again, dead screen. The woods around me were quiet now. No insects, no birds. Just windless silence and a faint sound like crying? No, not crying. Breathing. Something was breathing, deep and slow, like the whole forest exhaled at once. I backed away from the trail, planning to bushwhack toward a nearby road. But the moment I stepped off the path, I felt this horrible pressure in my chest, like my lungs were being compressed. The trees loomed too close, their trunks unnaturally tall, straight, perfect. My ears popped like I'd entered a different elevation, but the terrain hadn't changed. When I turned around, the trail was gone. Not obscured, gone. No footprints, no crushed brush. No hint I'd ever walked this way. Only that gray hush and the hum of air that felt just slightly too dense. I spun in circles for a while. Then I ran. Eventually I stumbled into a clearing. Dead center stood a massive wooden structure, something between a cabin and a shrine. Ancient, rotting, and wrong. The walls were covered in symbols etched deep into the wood. Spirals, circles, runes that made my eyes burn. A wind chime of bone fragments hung from the awning, turning slowly without any breeze. I heard whispers inside, whispering my name. I drew my knife. I don't know why, as if it would help. Then the door opened. There was no one there. Just a long, narrow hallway lit by hanging jars that glowed red from within. I should have run, but my legs moved on their own. At the end of the hallway was a mirror, a full-length mirror covered in black vines and dust. My reflection was wrong. It looked like me, but older, thinner, skin grayish, eyes too wide. My reflection smiled. I didn't. Then it mouthed something. I read its lips. You brought it with you. Behind me, something massive moved. I spun around, knife raised. Nothing. When I turned back, the mirror was gone. So was the hallway. I was outside, in the same clearing, but the structure had crumbled into ash, and the trees looked different, smaller, younger, like decades had passed. I ran until my legs gave out. Eventually I found a road, a real paved road with tire tracks. A hiker in a pickup found me 2 hours later. I looked like I'd been lost for a week, but by my watch I'd only been out there 10 hours. The pickup driver, Gary, I think offered me water. Said the trail I came out of hadn't been used in over 30 years. Showed me on his GPS. There was no Widow's Walk spur, no service trail, nothing. I showed him the spiral rock carving I'd found. It was gone when I went back. I told my supervisor a sanitized version. GPS malfunction, got turned around, found my way out. No mention of the shrine, or the mirror, or the whispers. But at night, I still hear my name, and sometimes when I walk past mirrors, I see my reflection hesitate before moving. Just for a second, like it's thinking about something. And every clock in my house, no matter how new, stops at 2:17 a.m.